Hi, and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. The clock's hands paused, quivered in their track, hesitating in their endless march. Each tick resonated slightly offbeat, a minute too premature or late, breaking the rhythm I had come to rely on. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, whispering stories they never shared before, as if my steps unlocked a secret language I couldn't quite decipher. The wallpaper pattern appeared to shift subtly, threads of afternoon shadows weaving through leaves that seemed less familiar than they should. My hand reached for the doorknob, and the cool metal felt like an unexpected touch, a greeting I hadn't anticipated. The door groaned in protest, and when it finally swung open, the room was empty when it shouldn't have been. I'm still living with what happened. Every morning I wake to the same electric hum that seems to come from inside the walls themselves. It's not the refrigerator or the heating system I've checked those a dozen times. The sound follows me from room to room, a low frequency that makes my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. The sleep doesn't come easily anymore. When it does, I dream of lights that move with purpose across a dark canvas, tracing patterns that feel like messages I should understand but can't. I wake with the taste of copper on my tongue and the sensation that someone has been standing at the foot of my bed, watching. The impression in the carpet is always there when I check, not deep enough to be conclusive, but present enough to make my hands shake. My phone turns itself on throughout the day. The screen illuminates with no notifications, no calls, just that pale blue glow casting shadows that seem to reach toward me. When I try to show others, it behaves normally. They look at me with that careful expression people reserve for those they think might be losing their grip on reality. The neighbors have started avoiding eye contact. I catch them whispering behind partially closed doors, their voices dropping to hushed tones when they notice me approaching. They claim they don't hear the humming, don't see the way the streetlights flicker in sequence every evening, don't notice how the air feels thicker on this block than anywhere else. But I remember now what they're trying to forget. I remember the night when everything changed, when the impossible became undeniably real. The figure stood at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still against the darkness. From my position near the cabin, I could make out its silhouette, tall, unnaturally thin, with proportions that didn't quite align with human anatomy. It didn't move for what felt like hours, and neither did I. We observed each other across that small clearing, separated by perhaps 50 yards of space that felt both infinite and uncomfortably intimate. The air around it seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, but the temperature had dropped considerably since sunset. My breath came out in visible puffs, yet that distortion continued, creating a bubble of altered reality around the motionless form. I tried to call out to demand identification or purpose, but my voice caught in my throat. Not from fear exactly, but from a deep, instinctual understanding that speaking would somehow acknowledge its presence in a way that couldn't be undone. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications I couldn't yet comprehend. Above us both, the sky held something that defied every rational explanation I'd built my life upon. It hovered without sound, without the mechanical noise of rotors or engines, a dark mass outlined against stars that seemed dimmer than they should have been. The craft, and I use that word because no other fits, remained motionless, as if it were simply another feature of the landscape, natural as a mountain or lake. The memory fragments here, dissolving into impressions and sensations rather than clear sequential events. I recall the feeling of time becoming elastic, moments stretching and compressing without warning. My watch face became meaningless, the numbers blurring together as minutes passed like hours or hours collapsed into heartbeats. When I try to remember what happened next, there's only emptiness, a gap where experience should be, like a page torn from a book mid-sentence. The next clear memory is of standing in the same spot, but the figure was gone, the sky was empty, and dawn was approaching from the wrong direction. But before that encounter, before the impossible became undeniable, there were signs I should have recognized. Patterns that now seem obvious but felt merely strange at the time. The electrical disturbances began subtly. The radio would lose signal at the same point each evening, dissolving into static that almost sounded like whispered conversations in a language I couldn't identify. The cabin's lights would dim in sequence, starting from the far end and moving toward wherever I happened to be sitting, as if something were systematically testing each circuit. My compass spun wildly whenever I tried to use it, the needle dancing between directions with frantic energy. I assumed it was broken, perhaps affected by some mineral deposit in the area, but now I understand it was responding to something far more significant. The local wildlife had gone silent, not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had thrown a switch. The constant background chorus of insects and night birds simply stopped, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Even the wind seemed muted, moving through the trees without its usual rustling commentary. I found myself losing track of time during simple tasks. I'd start preparing dinner and suddenly realize I'd been standing motionless at the stove for an unknown period, the ingredients still untouched, my mind blank of any intervening thoughts. These lapses became more frequent longer, until I began to question whether I was experiencing some form of medical episode. The temperature fluctuations made no meteorological sense. The air would shift from comfortable to uncomfortably cold within moments, then return to normal just as quickly. But it wasn't uniform. I could step from a pocket of frigid air into warmth simply by moving a few feet in any direction, as if invisible boundaries divided the space around the cabin into zones of different climates. Going further back, I can trace the beginning to something even more subtle, something I almost dismissed entirely. The metallic taste appeared first, not constantly, but in waves that would wash over me without warning, accompanied by a slight nausea that felt more like motion sickness than any stomach ailment. I'd pause whatever I was doing, waiting for the sensation to pass, attributing it to stress or poor diet or the change in altitude. There was a vibration in the ground, so faint I felt it more than heard it. When I pressed my palm against the cabin floor or the earth outside, I could sense a rhythmic pulse, like a massive heartbeat emanating from somewhere deep underground. The frequency was just below the threshold of hearing, but my body responded to it nonetheless, a subliminal tremor that made me restless and unable to focus. The smell of ozone would drift through the air at random intervals, sharp and clean like the aftermath of lightning, but the sky remained clear. I'd step outside, expecting to see storm clouds gathering, but found only stars and empty darkness stretching in all directions. My peripheral vision began playing tricks on me. I'd catch glimpses of movement that vanished the moment I turned to look directly. Shadows that seemed to shift independently of their sources, shapes that suggested presence but revealed nothing when examined closely. I started to feel watched, observed by something patient enough to remain just outside the range of direct perception. But even before these phenomena began, there was one moment so brief and seemingly insignificant that I nearly forgot it entirely, that now feels like the true beginning of everything that followed. I had arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in those deep oranges and purples that make you stop and appreciate the simple beauty of an ordinary evening. The air was warm, comfortable, filled with the familiar sounds of a forest settling into night. I felt relaxed, optimistic even, looking forward to a period of solitude and reflection away from the complications of daily life. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines that swayed gently in the evening breeze. A narrow path led from the gravel road to the front door, winding between trees that seemed to welcome rather than enclose. Everything appeared exactly as it should, exactly as I had hoped. I remember standing on the small porch, key in hand, taking a moment to appreciate the silence and the sense of isolation. This was what I had come for, a place where the modern world couldn't reach, where I could exist without the constant hum of civilization pressing against my consciousness. The key turned smoothly in the lock, the door opened without protest, and I stepped inside to find a space that felt immediately comfortable, as if it had been waiting specifically for my arrival. The furniture was simple but well maintained, the windows offered views of the surrounding forest, and the overall atmosphere suggested peace and restoration. I set down my bags, opened the windows to let in the evening air, and began the small rituals of settling into a temporary home. Everything felt normal, predictable, safe. But now, looking back through everything that followed, I understand that this moment of perfect normalcy was itself the anomaly. The calm was too complete, the peace too profound, as if the very environment was holding its breath in anticipation of what was about to begin. And somewhere in that gathering darkness, something was already watching, already waiting, already beginning its slow approach toward the unsuspecting figure I had been in those final moments before everything changed forever. Story 2. The window latch. I'm sitting here now, cataloging everything with the methodical precision of someone who knows they'll never leave this room again. The window latch was intact, securely fastened from the inside. The bedroom exhibits no evidence of forced entry or disruption. Drawers remain shut, and the closet is closed firmly. Dust has settled evenly across the dresser, save for one uneven pattern near the edge, suggesting movement. A single lamp is on, emitting a faint glow despite the faulty socket noted in previous observations. Sheets on the bed lay flat, undisturbed, with hospital corners intact. In the bathroom, a single towel is missing from the neatly stacked pile. The clock on the wall reads 1 hour ahead, yet no one has touched it in months. I know these details matter because I've become part of them now. My skin feels like paper, thin and translucent, and when I breathe, the air tastes metallic. There's no going back from this point. I understand that completely, but I can trace backward through my memories, following the thread that led me here, and maybe in the unwinding, I'll finally see what I missed when it was happening forward. The towel, that's where I should start, isn't it? Working backward from the missing towel. I remember standing in the bathroom, water dripping from my hair onto the tile floor. The mirror was fogged completely, but I could see my outline through the condensation, wavering and indistinct. I reached for the towel stack, and my hand trembled as I pulled one free. Not from cold, though the bathroom was frigid despite the steam. From something else. Something that made my fingers feel disconnected from my hands. The towel was warm, not just warm from the heated towel rack, but warm like it had been wrapped around someone else moments before. I pressed it to my face, and it smelled wrong. Not dirty, not musty, but wrong in a way that made my stomach clench, like copper pennies and sweet milk. I had taken that shower because I couldn't get clean. No matter how long I stood under the scalding water, scrubbing until my skin was raw, I couldn't wash away the feeling that something had touched me. Something that left no visible mark but had changed me at a cellular level. Before the shower, I had been sitting on the bed, staring at the clock on the wall. It read 1 hour ahead, just as it does now. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to adjust it. Every time I looked at those hands pointing to the incorrect time, my chest tightened with a recognition I couldn't name. The clock face seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision, and when I focused directly on it, the numbers appeared to shift slightly, like they were floating just above the surface. I had been sitting there for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Time had become unreliable. My hands were pressed flat against the perfectly made bed, hospital corners sharp enough to cut, and I was trying to remember why I had made it so precisely. I never made my bed like that. The sheets were pulled so tight they hummed when I pressed down on them. The lamp beside me flickered intermittently, casting shadows that moved independently of any light source. I knew the socket was faulty, had known it for weeks, but tonight the inconsistent illumination felt intentional, deliberate, like something was using the electrical inconsistency to communicate in a language of light and darkness. Before sitting on the bed, I had been standing at the dresser, running my finger through the dust. Most of it lay in an even layer, undisturbed for what must have been weeks, but near the edge there was a pattern. Not a handprint exactly, but the suggestion of movement, as if something had been dragged across the surface, disturbing the particles in a way that formed almost recognizable shapes. I traced the pattern with my fingertip, and the dust felt gritty, heavier than normal dust should feel. When I lifted my finger, particles clung to my skin, and they were warm, warmer than room temperature, warmer than my body temperature. They seemed to pulse against my fingertip like tiny hearts. The closet door was closed firmly, but I could hear something inside it. Not movement exactly, but a sound like fabric brushing against fabric. Like someone shifting their weight from foot to foot, trying to remain still but unable to control the small, involuntary movements of waiting. I had checked the closet earlier before I noticed the dust pattern. The door opened smoothly, revealing my clothes hanging in perfect order, everything exactly as I had left it, but the air inside was different, thicker, and when I breathed it in, it tasted like the inside of someone else's mouth. My clothes hung straight and undisturbed, but they smelled wrong, not like detergent or fabric softener, but like they had been worn by someone else. Someone whose skin chemistry was just different enough to make the familiar sense of my own clothing feel foreign and unsettling. I had closed the closet door quickly, pressing my back against it as if something might try to push it open from the inside. The wood felt warm against my spine, and I could swear I felt a gentle pressure from the other side, as if someone was leaning against the door, mirroring my position. Before checking the closet, I had been examining the window. The latch was secure, fastened from the inside just as it is now, but the glass was cold, much colder than it should have been given the temperature outside. When I pressed my palm against it, my handprint fogged the surface, but the fog formed in a pattern that looked almost like fingers pressing back from the other side. I had looked out through the glass, and the view was exactly as it always was. The same trees, the same distant buildings, the same empty street, but everything looked slightly off, as if I were seeing it through water. The proportions were wrong in a way I couldn't pinpoint, and the longer I stared, the more convinced I became that I was looking at a reflection of the outside rather than the outside itself. The window frame was painted white, but in the corners the paint had begun to peel, revealing something underneath that wasn't wood. It was smooth and pale, with a texture that reminded me of skin. When I touched it, it yielded slightly under pressure, warm and giving like living tissue. Before examining the window, I had been walking around the room, checking everything systematically. The drawers were all closed, but when I tried to open one, it resisted. Not locked, but resistant, as if something inside was pressing back against my efforts. When I finally managed to pull it open, everything inside was exactly as I had left it, but rearranged in subtle ways. Socks folded differently, underwear stacked in a new pattern. Nothing missing, nothing added, but everything touched by unfamiliar hands. The room felt smaller than usual, as if the walls had moved inward by inches. The ceiling seemed lower, pressing down with a weight I could feel in my shoulders. The air was thick and still, but occasionally I felt a breeze that had no source, carrying scents that belonged to other places, other times. I had entered the room because I heard something, a sound that pulled me from wherever I had been before, though I can't quite remember where that was. The sound was like breathing, but not human breathing. Too slow, too deep, with pauses that lasted too long between inhale and exhale. When I opened the door, the sound stopped immediately, but the silence that replaced it was worse. It was the kind of silence that feels occupied, full of held breath and suppressed movement. The kind of silence that makes you understand you're not alone, even when you can see that you are. The doorknob had been warm when I turned it, and it had turned too easily, as if the mechanism had been recently oiled. But I never oiled doorknobs. I never maintain anything in this place with that kind of care. Before I heard the breathing, I had been somewhere else in the house. The hallway, I think, though my memory of it is hazy. I remember walking toward the bedroom door, but the hallway seemed longer than usual, stretching out in front of me like it was growing as I moved through it. The walls in the hallway were covered with photographs, but when I glanced at them, the faces looked wrong. Not different faces, but the same faces arranged differently. Expressions shifted in ways that made familiar people look like strangers wearing familiar masks. My footsteps on the hallway floor sounded hollow, as if there were empty spaces beneath the boards. Each step echoed longer than it should have, and sometimes the echo came before the step, as if my footfalls were being anticipated and repeated by something walking just ahead of me. Before walking down the hallway, I had been in another room. The kitchen, perhaps, though the details are becoming unclear as I trace further back. I remember standing at a counter, looking down at something in my hands. Something small and ordinary, but wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. It was a key, just a simple brass key, but it was warm in my palm, and when I turned it over, it left a mark on my skin. Not a burn, but an impression, as if the metal had been soft enough to mold itself to my fingerprints. I had found the key in a place where it shouldn't have been, and I knew immediately that it was important, though I couldn't remember what it unlocked. But holding it made me feel watched, observed by something that was waiting to see what I would do with this small piece of metal that somehow changed everything. The key had appeared on the counter while I wasn't looking. I had turned away for just a moment, and when I turned back, it was there, sitting in a small pool of water that had no source. The water was warm, and when I touched it, it felt thicker than water should feel, more viscous, like it contained something dissolved within it. Before finding the key, I had been doing something routine, making coffee, I think, or preparing food, something normal and domestic that required no thought. But even these simple actions felt different, performed under observation, as if every movement was being catalogued and analyzed by an intelligence that found my daily rituals fascinating and strange. The ordinary objects around me had begun to feel unfamiliar. The coffee cup was the right size and shape, but it felt wrong in my hands, balanced differently than I remembered. The spoon I used to stir reflected my face in a way that made my features look subtly distorted, as if I were seeing myself through someone else's eyes. And before that I had been sleeping, deep, dreamless sleep that ended abruptly when I felt something brush against my face. Just the lightest touch, like a feather or a strand of hair, but when I opened my eyes, nothing was there. The room had been dark, but not empty. I could sense presence in the darkness, patient and still, waiting for me to wake up fully before revealing itself. But I had gotten up immediately, stumbling toward the kitchen, driven by a need to move, to do something normal and grounding. Now, sitting here with my paper-thin skin and metallic breath, I can trace it all back to that moment of waking, but even that wasn't the beginning. There was something before the sleep, something that had made sleep necessary. I had been sitting in a chair, reading. The book was open in my lap, but the words on the page kept rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. The story I was reading slowly transformed into something else, something that seemed to be about me, about this room, about events that hadn't happened yet but felt inevitable. The chair I was sitting in was comfortable, familiar, but it had begun to feel like it was molding itself to my body in ways that chairs shouldn't. The cushions seemed to shift and adjust, not just to my weight, but to my shape, creating a perfect impression that felt too intimate, too knowing. And before reading, I had been outside. I remember the transition from outdoor air to indoor air, the way the atmosphere changed when I crossed the threshold. Outside had been normal, unremarkable, but the moment I stepped inside, everything became charged with potential, heavy with significance. The door had closed behind me with a sound like a sigh, and the lock had engaged automatically, though I didn't remember turning it. The house had welcomed me back with a warmth that felt possessive, enveloping me in air that tasted like my own breath reflected back at me. But why had I gone outside in the first place? I can barely remember now, but I think it was because I had found something. Something small and seemingly insignificant that had made me need to leave, to get distance, to breathe air that didn't belong to this place. I had been cleaning moving objects to dust underneath them when I found it wedged behind a piece of furniture. It was just a small piece of paper, folded many times until it was no bigger than a postage stamp. But when I unfolded it, it contained a single sentence written in handwriting that looked almost like mine, but not quite. The sentence was simple, innocuous even, but reading it made my vision blur and my hands shake. It said, "You are exactly where you need to be." But the handwriting, so similar to my own yet subtly different, suggested that I had written it myself, in some state I couldn't remember, for reasons I couldn't fathom. That piece of paper was still in my pocket when I went outside, and it remained there when I came back in, and it's here with me now as I sit in this room that has become my final destination. The paper feels warm against my leg, pulsing gently like a second heartbeat, reminding me that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, only experienced, only lived through until they become part of you, until you become part of them, until there's no distinction left between the observer and the observed, between the one who remembers and the one who is remembered. Story 3. The door handle moved noiselessly under my touch. I stepped inside, the usual creak of the floorboards absent, as if they had been muffled by something unseen. The walls seemed to absorb my presence, refusing to echo my footsteps. I walked forward, past the mirror that caught no light, and slipped past heavy curtains that didn't stir with my passing. The clock on the mantel held its hands still, mocking the passage of time. I reached to turn on the lamp, but paused, sensing its refusal to glow. Something about the room felt intentional, like a held breath waiting for release. And in that stillness, I understood I was not alone. But that's not how it really happened. Nothing happened at all, actually. I was just tired that evening, probably more exhausted than I realized. The mind plays tricks when you're running on too little sleep, and I'd been working long shifts for weeks. It's perfectly normal to feel disoriented when you're that worn down. I didn't see anything unusual. The room looked exactly like it always did: ordinary furniture, familiar shadows, nothing out of place. I must have imagined that strange quality to the air, that thickness that seemed to press against my skin. It was probably just the humidity. The weather had been unpredictable lately, and old houses hold moisture in odd ways. The silence wasn't really silence either. There were the usual sounds: the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, pipes settling in the walls, maybe a car passing outside. I just wasn't paying attention properly. When you're distracted, your brain filters out background noise, makes everything seem quieter than it actually is. That's all it was. I didn't notice the way the lampshade cast shadows that seemed to move independently of the light source. That would be impossible anyway. Shadows don't behave that way unless there's something causing them to shift: a tree branch outside, headlights from the street, something perfectly rational. I wasn't watching the shadows. I had no reason to watch them. The temperature was normal too. I wasn't cold, despite the way my breath seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. Houses get drafty sometimes, especially around the windows. Cold spots are common in older buildings. The fact that I could see my breath for just a moment doesn't mean anything significant. It was probably just a trick of the light, or maybe I was breathing harder than usual without realizing it. I definitely didn't hear that sound, the one that wasn't quite humming and wasn't quite static, but something in between. Even if I had heard something like that, it would have been the electrical system. Old wiring makes all sorts of noises. Sometimes it sounds almost musical, almost like voices having a conversation just below the range of understanding. But I didn't hear voices. There were no voices. The way the walls seemed to pulse slightly, like they were breathing, that was just my peripheral vision playing tricks. When you're tired, your eyes don't focus properly. Everything seems to shimmer and move at the edges of your sight. It's a common phenomenon, nothing to worry about. The walls were perfectly still, perfectly normal. Paint and plaster don't breathe. I wasn't afraid. There was no reason to be afraid of my own house, my own living room where I'd spent countless evenings reading and watching television. Fear would have been irrational. The rapid beating of my heart was just from climbing the front steps too quickly. The way my hands trembled as I reached for the light switch was probably low blood sugar. I'd skipped dinner, and that affects your nervous system. The light switch felt warm under my fingers, warmer than it should have been, but electrical components generate heat when they're in use. That's basic physics. The fact that the warmth seemed to pulse, seemed almost alive, doesn't mean anything. Metal and plastic don't have heartbeats. I was imagining things. When I pressed the switch and nothing happened, that was just a burned out bulb. It happens all the time. Bulbs burn out without warning, leaving you standing in darkness that feels heavier than it should. The darkness wasn't actually heavy, of course. Darkness doesn't have weight or substance. It was just the absence of light, nothing more. I didn't see the figure standing in the corner where no figure could possibly fit. The corner was empty, just the meeting of two walls and nothing else. If I thought I saw something there, something tall and impossibly thin, it was just the way shadows fell across the space. Shadows can create the illusion of presence, especially when you're not expecting them. The figure didn't turn to look at me. There was no figure to turn. And even if there had been, it wouldn't have had eyes that reflected light like an animal's eyes, wouldn't have stood perfectly motionless while somehow conveying the impression of intense movement. These are the kinds of details your mind invents when it's trying to make sense of nothing at all. I didn't back toward the door. I simply decided to leave the room, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do when you realize you're too tired to function properly. The fact that I moved slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, was just common sense. You don't want to trip over furniture in the dark. The doorknob didn't resist when I tried to turn it. Door hardware doesn't develop a will of its own. If it felt like something was holding it from the other side, that was just the mechanism sticking. Old doors stick sometimes, especially in humid weather. The metal expands and contracts, makes things difficult to operate. I wasn't trapped. The word trapped implies intention, implies that something was deliberately preventing my escape. But there was nothing to escape from, no reason to use a word like escape at all. I was just having trouble with a sticky door, that's all. The sound of breathing that wasn't my own breathing was just the house settling. Houses make all sorts of respiratory sounds, air moving through vents, wood expanding and contracting, the natural rhythm of a structure responding to temperature changes. The breathing didn't come from behind me, slow and deliberate, because there was no breathing at all. When I finally got the door open and stepped into the hallway, I didn't run. Running would have implied panic, and there was nothing to panic about. I walked at a normal pace to the kitchen, where I got a glass of water and sat down at the table to collect my thoughts. The water tasted metallic, but that's common with old pipes. Municipal water systems often have a mineral taste, especially late in the evening when usage is low. I didn't avoid that room for the next several days. I simply didn't have occasion to use it. There are plenty of other places to sit and relax in a house. The living room isn't essential for daily activities. If I chose to read in the bedroom instead, or watch television in the kitchen, that was just personal preference. The dreams that followed weren't really dreams, because I don't remember dreaming at all. Sleep was perfectly normal, uninterrupted by visions of that corner where nothing had been standing. I didn't wake up several times each night with the feeling that something was watching me from the foot of the bed. Feelings aren't facts. The sensation of being observed was just residual anxiety from work stress. I certainly didn't dream about standing in that room again, seeing it from an impossible angle, as if I were floating near the ceiling looking down at myself. In this dream that wasn't a dream, I watched myself enter the room, watched the figure in the corner that couldn't exist, watched the whole scene play out from above while simultaneously experiencing it from ground level. But dreams don't work that way, and I wasn't dreaming anyway. The detail about the figure's face, or what should have been its face, isn't worth mentioning because I never saw it clearly. If I had seen it, which I didn't, it would have been perfectly normal. Faces are just arrangements of features, eyes, nose, mouth, nothing unusual about that. The fact that this particular arrangement seemed wrong somehow, seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at it, would have been a trick of poor lighting. I didn't research the history of the house. There was no reason to research anything, no reason to spend hours at the library looking through old records and newspaper archives. If I had done such research, which I didn't, I wouldn't have found anything interesting. Certainly nothing about previous tenants who reported similar experiences, nothing about complaints to landlords about presences in the living room. The librarian didn't tell me about the family who lived here before me, didn't mention how they left suddenly without explanation. These conversations never happened. I never sat across from her desk while she spoke in hushed tones about how the previous tenants seemed frightened, how they wouldn't say exactly what was wrong, but insisted they couldn't stay another night. I didn't learn about the tenant before them or the one before that. There's no pattern of short-term occupancy, no history of people moving out after just a few months of living here. Rental properties have normal turnover rates, and there are always practical reasons why people relocate. job changes, family situations, financial considerations, nothing mysterious about any of it. The detail about how each family mentioned the living room specifically, how they all seem to avoid that particular space, isn't relevant because I never heard these details. Property managers don't discuss previous tenants with current ones. It would be unprofessional, possibly illegal. These conversations exist only in my imagination, if they exist at all. I didn't start sleeping with the lights on. I simply developed a preference for a brighter bedroom environment. Some people sleep better with ambient light, and there's nothing unusual about that. The fact that total darkness had become unbearable, that it felt too much like the darkness in that room, doesn't indicate fear. It's just a change in sleeping habits. The living room door doesn't stay closed on its own. I close it myself for perfectly practical reasons. Closed doors help with heating efficiency, keep warm air from escaping into unused spaces. The fact that I check the lock twice before going to bed isn't compulsive behavior. It's just good security practice. I don't listen for sounds from that room. If I pause sometimes in the hallway, if I stand very still and focus my hearing toward that door, it's just normal awareness of my environment. Home security is important, and being alert to unusual noises is responsible behavior. The sounds I don't hear, the soft shuffling, the occasional creak of floorboards under weight that shouldn't be there, these sounds don't exist. The scratching noise that comes from inside the walls isn't coming from inside the walls because there is no scratching noise. If there were such a sound, it would be mice or squirrels or some other small animal. Old houses are never completely sealed against wildlife. The fact that the scratching seems to follow a pattern, seems almost like Morse code or some other form of communication, would be pure coincidence. I didn't call an exterminator. There was no reason to call anyone, no pest problem to address. If I had made such a call, which I didn't, the exterminator wouldn't have found any signs of animal activity. He wouldn't have stood in my living room with a puzzled expression, wouldn't have said that the sounds I described weren't consistent with any wildlife he knew about. The conversation where he asked if I'd experienced anything else unusual never took place. I never found myself wanting to tell him about the figure in the corner, never felt the words building up in my throat before I swallowed them back down. Professional service providers don't need to hear about imaginary problems, and there was nothing to tell him anyway. I don't avoid having guests over. I simply prefer solitude these days, which is a normal personality trait. Some people are more social than others, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying your own company. The fact that I can't bear the thought of someone else experiencing what I experienced isn't a factor in my decision-making, because I didn't experience anything. My sister didn't ask why I seemed nervous when she suggested visiting. We didn't have a conversation where I made increasingly elaborate excuses to keep her away from the house. I never heard myself inventing reasons why we should meet at restaurants instead. Never noticed the concern growing in her voice as I deflected her offers to come over. She didn't say I sounded different, didn't mention that I seemed distracted and jumpy. People don't change that dramatically over the course of a few weeks, and I haven't changed at all. I'm exactly the same person I was before I moved into this house, before I experienced nothing unusual in that living room. The night I woke up standing in the hallway outside the living room door, that was just sleepwalking. Stress can trigger sleepwalking episodes in adults, and I've been under more stress than usual lately. The fact that I was reaching for the door handle, that my hand was already turning it when I became fully conscious, doesn't mean anything significant. I wasn't trying to go into that room. My subconscious mind was just confused about the layout of the house, probably trying to navigate toward the bathroom in the dark. The intense feeling of being called, of hearing my name spoken from the other side of the door, was just the disorientation that comes with waking up in an unexpected place. The voice didn't sound like my own voice, but deeper and somehow hollow. There was no voice at all. Sleepwalking episodes sometimes involve auditory hallucinations, brief moments where the brain creates sounds that aren't really there. The fact that the voice seemed to be coming from inside the room while simultaneously coming from inside my own head would be explained by the transitional state between sleep and wakefulness. I didn't try the door handle that night. I immediately returned to bed once I realized where I was. If the handle had turned easily under my touch, if the door had swung open to reveal that impossible darkness that seemed to move and breathe, I wouldn't remember it because it didn't happen. The room wasn't different when the door opened. Rooms don't change their fundamental nature, don't transform into spaces that feel larger inside than the house's architecture should allow. The ceiling couldn't have been higher than before, couldn't have stretched up into shadows that seemed to go on forever. I didn't see myself standing in the corner where the figure usually stood. That would be impossible, a violation of basic physical laws. People can't be in two places at once, can't observe themselves from across a room while simultaneously being the person observed. The other version of myself didn't turn to look at me standing in the doorway, didn't smile with an expression I'd never worn before. The conversation between the two versions of myself never happened. I didn't hear my own voice asking questions I didn't want to ask, didn't listen to myself providing answers I didn't want to hear. The discussion about how long this had been going on, about how many times I'd stood in that corner without remembering, exists only in the realm of impossible things that don't occur in reality. I woke up in my own bed the next morning, exactly where I'd gone to sleep. There was no period of lost time, no gap in my memory between standing in that doorway and opening my eyes to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows. The fact that I was fully dressed, that my shoes were muddy despite not remembering going outside, has a perfectly rational explanation that I simply can't recall at the moment. The mud wasn't the red clay that doesn't exist anywhere in this region. Local soil is sandy and dark, nothing like the strange reddish earth that seemed to cling to my shoes with unusual persistence. I must have walked through a construction site or a landscaping project, somewhere that imported different soil for specific purposes. I didn't spend that morning researching the geological composition of the area, didn't become obsessed with finding out where that particular type of clay might exist. The hours I didn't spend online, looking at geological surveys and soil maps, weren't fruitless. There was no research to be fruitless, no mystery to solve. The discovery that the closest matching soil type exists several hundred miles away, in a region I've never visited, isn't relevant because I never made such a discovery. Even if I had, there would be logical explanations. Soil gets transported for various commercial purposes, gets tracked around on vehicles and equipment. The presence of foreign earth on my shoes wouldn't indicate anything supernatural. I don't check my shoes every morning now. If I examine them carefully before putting them on, if I look for traces of that red clay or any other evidence of nighttime travels I don't remember, it's just normal maintenance of my belongings. Taking care of your possessions is responsible behavior. The morning I found grass stains on my knees, grass that was greener than any vegetation in my yard, that was just normal wear and tear on my clothing. I must have knelt down outside for some forgotten reason, gardening, retrieving something I'd dropped, any number of mundane activities. The fact that I don't remember kneeling anywhere doesn't mean it didn't happen for perfectly ordinary reasons. I didn't start keeping a journal, didn't begin writing down everything I could remember about each night in an attempt to identify patterns. Writers keep journals for creative purposes, and I've always been interested in writing. The entries that document my location and activities before bed, that note the condition of my clothes each morning, are just creative exercises. The entries aren't becoming increasingly difficult to write, aren't filled with details I don't remember recording. My handwriting hasn't changed, hasn't become looser and more flowing, as if someone else were guiding my pen. Handwriting naturally varies depending on fatigue levels, writing speed, and other factors. The journal doesn't contain descriptions of places I've never been, conversations with people I've never met. If there are entries that seem to be written from the perspective of someone standing in that corner of the living room, someone watching me sleep through the bedroom doorway, those are creative writing exercises. Fiction writing often involves adopting different perspectives and viewpoints. I didn't read an entry written in my own handwriting that described the taste of that metallic air, the feeling of existing in multiple locations simultaneously, the sound of my own voice calling to me from other rooms. These details don't exist in any journal because the journal itself doesn't exist because there's nothing to document. The living room door stands open now. I opened it myself for practical reasons related to air circulation and heating efficiency. The fact that I can't remember opening it, that I distinctly recall checking the lock before bed, doesn't indicate anything unusual. Memory is unreliable, especially when you're tired or stressed. The room looks exactly as it always has. Furniture in the same positions, walls the same color, windows facing the same direction they've always faced. If the space seems somehow larger, if the corners appear to extend further than the house's blueprint should allow, that's just a trick of perspective and lighting. I don't avoid looking at the corner where nothing stands. There's no reason to avoid looking at any part of my own living room. If my eyes tend to skip over that particular area, if I find myself unable to focus directly on that space, it's just because there's nothing interesting there to hold my attention. The figure isn't clearer now, isn't more solid and defined than it was before. There's no figure, so it can't become more or less anything. If I sometimes catch myself nodding in response to words I can't quite hear, if I find myself answering questions that weren't asked aloud, that's just absent-minded behavior. People talk to themselves all the time. I'm not having conversations with the corner of my living room. The exchange of information that seems to occur when I stand in that doorway, the sense of communication happening below the level of conscious thought, is just my imagination working overtime. Stress can cause all sorts of mental phenomena, including the illusion of dialogue with inanimate objects. The corner doesn't know things about me that I've never told anyone. Empty spaces don't have access to private information, don't possess knowledge about childhood events I've tried to forget or decisions I've never admitted to making. The feeling that something in that corner understands me better than I understand myself is just projection, just the human tendency to attribute consciousness to things that don't possess it. I didn't learn my real name from something standing in that corner. I've always known my own name, have carried the same identity since birth. If there's another name that feels more accurate, that seems to resonate in ways my legal name never has, it's just a fantasy, just the kind of alternative identity people sometimes imagine for themselves. The other name doesn't feel like it belongs to someone who has always lived in that corner, someone who has been waiting patiently for me to come home. Names don't have histories of their own, don't carry the weight of experiences that predate their current owner. The sense that this other name has been mine much longer than the name on my driver's license is just confusion, just the mind playing tricks with identity and memory. I don't respond when the other name is called. If I sometimes find myself turning toward the living room when I hear it whispered from that direction, if I feel a pull toward that corner when the name drifts through the house late at night, that's just coincidence. Old houses make sounds that can resemble human speech, and the brain is programmed to find patterns even where none exist. The dreams where I stand in that corner and call to myself in the bedroom, where I watch myself sleep and whisper that other name until I wake up, aren't dreams at all because I sleep peacefully through the night. If I wake with the taste of that metallic air in my mouth, if I can still feel the sensation of standing in two places at once, those are just the lingering effects of deep sleep. I don't remember what it feels like to exist in that corner, don't carry the memory of seeing the room from that impossible angle. The perspective from that space, the way the entire house becomes visible as if the walls were transparent, exists only in imagination. The knowledge of what lies behind every door, what occupies every room, what moves through the house when I think I'm alone, isn't knowledge at all. Nothing moves through the house when I'm sleeping. The sounds of footsteps in the hallway, of doors opening and closing, of furniture being rearranged in rooms I haven't entered, are just the normal sounds of an old building settling. Houses are never completely quiet, never completely still. I don't find evidence of these nighttime activities. Furniture doesn't relocate itself, doesn't end up in different positions without human intervention. If I sometimes discover that chairs have been moved, that books have been opened to specific pages, that windows have been unlatched, there are rational explanations I simply haven't identified yet. The open book on the kitchen table, turned to a page about sleepwalking and dissociative episodes, opened itself to that page for reasons related to air currents or vibrations from passing traffic. Books don't choose their own pages, don't present information that seems specifically relevant to current circumstances. The fact that I don't remember owning this particular book, don't recall purchasing or borrowing it, doesn't mean anything significant. I didn't read the highlighted passages about people who lose time, who find themselves in places they don't remember going, who discover evidence of activities they don't remember performing. If I had read such passages, which I didn't, they wouldn't have felt like descriptions of my own recent experiences. The similarities would be purely coincidental. The book doesn't contain margin notes written in my handwriting, doesn't include observations about the corner of the living room and the figure that stands there. Academic texts sometimes contain previous readers' annotations, and handwriting can be similar between different people. The notes that discuss the feeling of being called home, of finally understanding where you really belong, were written by someone else entirely. I belong in my bedroom, in my kitchen, in the normal spaces where people conduct their daily lives. I don't belong in the corner of the living room, don't feel most comfortable when standing in that impossible space where the walls meet and something else begins. The sense of homecoming I don't feel when I stand there, the peace that doesn't wash over me in that location, isn't real. The corner doesn't feel more familiar than the rest of the house, doesn't seem like the place I've been trying to return to my entire life. I haven't been searching for anything, haven't felt incomplete or displaced until moving into this house. The sensation of finally being where I'm supposed to be, of having found the exact spot in the universe that was designed for me, is just emotional confusion brought on by stress. I don't spend hours standing in that corner now. If I lose track of time while positioned in that space, if I sometimes discover that entire nights have passed while I remained motionless in that exact location, it's just absent-mindedness. People lose themselves in thought all the time, become so absorbed in internal processes that they forget to track external time. The view from the corner isn't clearer than the view from anywhere else in the room. All perspectives are equally valid, equally real. If the corner provides a vantage point that somehow encompasses more space than should be physically possible, if I can see into other rooms and other houses and other places entirely while standing there, that's just imagination enhanced by fatigue. I don't see other versions of myself in other houses, other people standing in other corners, in other living rooms, in other towns. The network of corners that seems to connect across vast distances, the sense of being part of something larger and more complex than a single room in a single house, exists only in fantasy. The other people who stand in their own corners, who have found their own way home to spaces that exist between normal spaces, aren't real. If I sometimes feel their presence, if I sense their awareness and recognition, if we seem to acknowledge each other across impossible distances, that's just the loneliness of living alone, creating imaginary companions. We don't share information about our respective locations, don't communicate details about the houses we inhabit and the people who think they live in them. The growing understanding of how many corners exist, how many people have found their way to these spaces, how long this has been happening, isn't understanding at all. I haven't learned that the people who think they live in these houses, who believe they're the primary occupants of these spaces, are just temporary visitors. The revelation that we who stand in the corners are the actual residents, that we've been here much longer than the others realize, isn't a revelation because it isn't true. The person who thinks this is their house, who believes they moved in recently and began experiencing strange phenomena, doesn't exist. I am not watching them from my corner, not observing their growing confusion and fear, not waiting patiently for them to understand the real nature of their situation. They don't write in journals about their experiences, don't research the history of the house, don't try to find rational explanations for things that have no rational explanations. I don't read their journal entries over their shoulder, don't influence their research, don't guide them toward story 4. The surface beneath me vibrated gently, yet there was no hum in the air. Light stretched lazily, cast by an invisible sun that neither warmed nor moved. My limbs floated, but the ground seemed to cling, a sticky tension pulling yet yielding. Each breath was hesitant, as if borrowed with no rhythm of my own. Shadows wavered on walls that pulsed, a silent crowd waiting to converge. I grasped for a heartbeat I couldn't find, and sensed, perhaps imagined something observing from just beyond the fading glow. I waked to the taste of copper on my tongue. The bedroom walls breathe in the half-light, expanding and contracting like lungs I cannot see. My sheets are damp with sweat that smells wrong, metallic, sharp, like the air before lightning strikes. The digital clock blinks 3:17, but the numbers seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. There's a sound coming from somewhere, not outside, not inside either. It lives in the space between, a low frequency that makes my teeth ache. The door to my closet stands half open. I don't remember leaving it that way. My skin tingles with electricity that has no source. I press my palms against the mattress and feel it pulse beneath me, warm and yielding like flesh. The sensation travels up my arms, spreading through my chest until I can't tell where my body ends and the bed begins. I've been having the dreams again, the ones where I'm not myself. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hums a tune I almost recognize. The fluorescent light above the sink flickers in a pattern that feels deliberate, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. I pour water from the tap, but it tastes of ozone and leaves my mouth dry. The window above the sink looks out onto the backyard, where the grass grows in perfect spirals around bare patches of earth. I don't remember planting anything there. The soil is too dark, too rich, as if something has been feeding it from below. There were lights behind the trees. I close my eyes and see fragments, a door opening onto nothing, hands that aren't quite hands reaching through the gap, the sound of my own voice saying words I don't understand in a language that makes my throat burn. The coffee mug in my hands grows warm without the coffee being hot. The ceramic seems to breathe against my palms, expanding and contracting in rhythm with something I cannot name. Steam rises from the liquid, but it moves upward in perfect spirals, defying the still air of the kitchen. Time moves strangely here. I glance at the clock on the microwave and watch the minutes jump backward, then forward, then stop entirely. The second hand on the wall clock ticks in reverse, but I can hear it moving forward. Both sounds exist in the same moment, overlapping like voices in a conversation I'm not meant to understand. The half-open closet door calls to me from the bedroom. I can feel it even from here, a presence that demands acknowledgement. When I finally return to look, the darkness inside seems deeper than it should be, as if the space extends far beyond the confines of the small room. I don't remember ever coming back. My reflection in the bathroom mirror moves a fraction of a second after I do. The delay is subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there. I raise my hand and watch my reflection hesitate before following. My eyes in the mirror are darker than they should be, pupils dilated despite the bright vanity lights. The shower runs cold, then scalding, then cold again without my touching the handle. Steam fills the bathroom, but it doesn't fog the mirror. Instead, it forms patterns on the walls, spirals and lines that look almost like writing in a script I've never seen but somehow recognize. Water droplets on my skin feel heavier than they should, clinging like they're made of something thicker than water. They roll upward sometimes, defying gravity, tracing paths along my arms that tingle long after they've disappeared. The noise didn't come from outside. I find myself standing in the living room without remembering how I got there. The television is on, but there's no picture, just static that moves in waves across the screen. The sound is turned down, yet I can hear voices murmuring beneath the white noise, speaking in that same burning language from my dreams. The couch cushions bear the impression of someone sitting, though I've been alone all morning. The indentation is too large to be mine, and when I press my hand into it, the fabric is warm and slightly damp. It smells of ozone and something else, something organic and unfamiliar. Sunlight streams through the windows, but it casts no shadows. The room is evenly lit, as if the light comes from everywhere and nowhere at once. Objects seem to glow from within the coffee table, the bookshelf, the picture frames containing photos of people I'm beginning not to recognize. The half-open door appears again, but now it's the front door of the house. I don't remember opening it. Cool air flows in, carrying scents that don't belong to this season, night-blooming flowers and rain on hot asphalt, though the sky is clear and bright. Beyond the threshold, the street looks wrong. The houses are the same, but their proportions seem off, as if someone has stretched them vertically or compressed them horizontally. The trees lining the sidewalk bear leaves in colors that don't exist in nature, deep purples and electric blues that hurt to look at directly. I step outside and feel the ground give slightly beneath my feet, like walking on a surface that's pretending to be solid. The air tastes of metal and electricity, and every breath makes my lungs feel heavier, as if I'm breathing something thicker than air. My neighbor's dog barks, but the sound comes from above rather than from their yard. I look up and see nothing but blue sky, yet the barking continues, echoing from somewhere impossible. There were lights behind the trees, moving lights that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The memory surfaces like a bubble rising through thick liquid. I was walking, no, I was being walked, my feet moving without my conscious control. The pavement beneath me felt soft and yielding, and the streetlights cast shadows that bent at impossible angles. Something was following me or leading me. I could feel its presence like a weight on my shoulders, a warm pressure that guided my steps. My skin tingled with that same electric sensation, and the air around me shimmered like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. The trees whispered without wind, their leaves rustling in languages I almost understood. Between their branches, lights danced not quite white, not quite blue, but something in between that made my eyes water. They pulsed in patterns that seemed meaningful, like signals or messages meant for someone else. I tried to turn around to go back the way I came, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs continued moving forward, carrying me toward something I couldn't see but could feel waiting in the darkness ahead. The sensation returns now as I stand in my doorway. My feet want to move, to carry me down the front steps and onto that strange street where the houses breathe and the trees speak in colors. The tingling in my skin intensifies, spreading from my fingertips up my arms and into my chest. I close the door, but I can still feel the pull. In the basement, boxes I don't remember packing line the walls. They're sealed with tape that looks fresh, but when I touch it, it crumbles like it's been there for decades. Inside the first box, I find clothes that aren't mine, or maybe they are, but from a time I can't recall wearing them. The fabric feels wrong against my fingers, too smooth and slightly warm, as if it's been recently worn. There's a shirt I almost recognize, pants that might have been mine, shoes that fit perfectly but feel foreign on my feet. Everything smells of that same metallic scent, mixed with something organic and earthy. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper that dissolves at my touch, I find a photograph. It shows me standing in a place I've never been, a field of grass that grows in perfect spirals, under a sky that's too white to be real. I'm not alone in the picture, but the other figures are blurred beyond recognition, their forms indistinct and shifting. I don't remember the photograph being taken. The basement air grows thick and hard to breathe. The single bulb overhead flickers in that same deliberate pattern, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. The concrete walls seem to pulse with a rhythm that matches something deep inside my chest, not my heartbeat, but something else, something borrowed. I can hear water dripping, but all the pipes are dry. The sound comes from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off surfaces that shouldn't exist in this small space. Each drop seems to fall upward, defying gravity, disappearing into a ceiling that stretches higher than it should. The staircase back to the main floor looks longer than it did when I came down. Each step creaks under my weight, but the sound is delayed, as if the noise has to travel through something thick and resistant before reaching my ears. The handrail under my palm feels warm and slightly sticky, pulsing with that same borrowed rhythm. I don't remember ever coming back. But I must have, because I'm in the kitchen again, watching steam rise from a cup of coffee I don't remember making. The liquid inside is darker than it should be, almost black, and it reflects light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When I lift the cup to my lips, it tastes of copper and ozone. The window above the sink shows a different view now. The backyard is gone, replaced by a field that stretches to the horizon, the same field from the photograph. The grass grows in those perfect spirals, and in the distance, figures move with the same blurred, indistinct quality as the ones in the picture. One of the figures raises what might be a hand in greeting or warning. I wave back without meaning to, my arm moving of its own accord. The figure doesn't respond, but I can feel its attention like a weight on my skin. The half-open door calls to me again, but now it's every door in the house. The closet, the front door, the basement door all standing slightly ajar, revealing darkness that seems deeper than it should be. From each opening comes that low-frequency sound, the one that makes my teeth ache and my bones vibrate. I move through the house like a sleepwalker, drawn from room to room by forces I can't see or understand. Each space feels larger than it should, as if the walls have moved when I wasn't looking. The ceiling in the living room stretches impossibly high, and the hallway to the bedroom seems to extend for miles. My footsteps echo strangely, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, as if I'm following someone who walks with my exact gait and rhythm. The floorboards beneath my feet give slightly with each step, warm and yielding like flesh. In the bedroom, the sheets on my bed are arranged differently, pulled back as if someone has just gotten up, still bearing the impression of a body that isn't quite my shape. The pillow holds the scent of that metallic air, mixed with something else, something that makes my skin tingle with recognition. The digital clock still blinks 3:17, but now I can see the numbers changing when I watch directly. They shift and morph, becoming symbols I don't recognize but somehow understand. Time moves in circles here, looping back on itself, trapping moments in amber. There were lights behind the trees, moving lights that pulsed in rhythm with something deep inside my chest. The memory comes back stronger now, more vivid. I was walking through streets that looked like mine but weren't, guided by that warm pressure on my shoulders. The pavement beneath my feet rippled like water, and the air around me shimmered with heat that had no source. The lights between the trees grew brighter as I approached, pulsing faster, matching the rhythm of something that wasn't quite my heartbeat but felt familiar nonetheless. They called to me in colors that had no names, speaking in frequencies that bypassed my ears and went straight to my bones. I remember reaching the edge of the field, the same field I can see from my kitchen window now. The grass beneath my feet was warm and soft, growing in those perfect spirals that seemed to draw my eyes inward deeper, toward something at the center that I couldn't quite see. The figures were waiting for me there, or maybe I was waiting for them. Their forms shifted and blurred, never quite solid, never quite gone. They spoke without words, their voices echoing inside my skull in that burning language that made my throat ache. Something passed between us, information, sensation, something that left me changed in ways I'm still discovering. My skin tingled with electricity that had no source, and the air around me tasted of copper and ozone. Then I was walking back, but the journey felt different. The streets had changed, become more familiar, yet somehow wrong. The houses breathed with quiet rhythm, and the trees whispered secrets I wasn't meant to understand. I don't remember reaching my front door. I don't remember going inside. But I must have, because I'm here now, standing in my living room, watching shadows move independently of their sources. The television static has formed patterns, spirals, and lines that look almost like writing in that same impossible script from the bathroom steam. The couch cushions still bear the impression of someone sitting, but now there are two impressions, side by side. Both are too large to be mine, and when I press my hands into them, the fabric is warm and slightly damp. They smell of ozone and that organic scent that makes my skin remember things my mind won't let me see. The half-open closet door in the bedroom calls to me one final time. I walk toward it slowly, my feet moving without conscious direction, drawn by forces I can't resist. The darkness inside seems to pulse with its own rhythm, warm and inviting. I reach for the handle, my fingers tingling with that familiar electricity. The metal is warm under my palm, warmer than it should be, and it seems to pulse with life. As I pull the door wider, the darkness inside shifts and moves, revealing depths that shouldn't exist in such a small space. The air flowing out carries scents of night-blooming flowers and rain on hot asphalt, though outside my bedroom window the sky is clear and bright. I can hear voices murmuring in the distance, speaking in that burning language that makes my throat ache with recognition. I step forward, my foot crossing the threshold into darkness that feels solid beneath me. The tingling in my skin intensifies, spreading through my body like electricity through water. Behind me, I can hear the house breathing, its walls expanding and contracting with borrowed rhythm. The surface beneath me vibrates gently, yet there is no hum in the air. Story 5. The living room door was ajar at the time of examination. Entering the premises, the furniture was neatly arranged, with no disarray evident, and the surfaces devoid of dust or smudges. One chair was noticeably absent from the dining set, yet the floor bore no marks of rearrangement. A single lamp cast a dim light over the room, its bulb freshly replaced, implying recent activity. The kitchen was immaculate, with all utensils accounted for, except a knife missing from the block. Water dripped at a steady pace from the kitchen faucet, although no dishes were in the sink. The thermostat was set to 72 degrees, yet the air felt cooler. Upon inspection, all windows were closed and locked securely. However, the silence was interrupted by the faint ticking of a clock that was not present. I read this report every morning, I don't know why. The words feel familiar in my mouth when I whisper them, like a prayer I learned before I could understand its meaning. The paper is creased now from my fingers, tracing the same lines over and over. Someone wrote this about my house, about my kitchen, about the chair I can't remember moving. The buzzing started 3 weeks ago, or maybe 3 months. Time feels elastic now, stretching and contracting like a rubber band pulled too tight. I wake up and the sound is there, humming just beneath my consciousness, vibrating through the bones of my skull. It's not coming from the refrigerator, I checked. It's not the air conditioning unit or the power lines outside. I've checked those too, standing barefoot on the cold concrete of my driveway at hours when the sky looks wrong. The lamp in my living room flickers sometimes, just once, a quick stutter of light that makes the shadows dance for a fraction of a second. When it happens, I smell something sharp and metallic, like copper pennies held too long in a sweaty palm. The bulb is new. I remember changing it, climbing on the chair that's missing from my dining set, but I don't remember taking the chair away. There were lights behind the trees. The kitchen faucet still drips, one drop every 4 seconds, I've counted. The rhythm matches something I can't quite place, like a heartbeat that's just slightly off tempo. Sometimes I stand there and let the sound wash over me, feeling the coolness of the tile through my socks. The knife block sits on the counter, one slot empty. I don't cook much anymore. I don't remember the last time I used a knife for anything. My skin tingles when I touch the doorframe leading from the kitchen to the living room. It's a gentle electric sensation, like static electricity, but warmer, more purposeful. The wood feels different under my fingers now, softer somehow, as if it's breathing. I run my palm along the grain and feel it give slightly, yielding to my touch in a way that wood shouldn't yield. The thermostat reads 72 degrees, but the air tastes cold. It has a flavor now, the air in my house, something clean and sharp, like the moment before lightning strikes. I've started wearing sweaters indoors, pulling the sleeves down over my hands. The fabric helps buffer the tingling that seems to emanate from every surface I touch. I don't remember ever coming back. Sleep comes in fragments now. I'll be lying in bed, listening to the buzzing that never quite stops, and then suddenly I'm standing in my living room. The lamp is on, casting that same dim light, and the door is ajar. Always ajar, never fully open, never completely closed. Through the gap, I can see the hallway stretching away into darkness that feels too deep for such a small space. The ticking is louder at night, that clock that isn't there, marking time that doesn't feel real. I've searched every room, opened every drawer, looked behind every piece of furniture. There is no clock, but the sound persists, steady and patient, counting down to something I can't name. When I close my eyes, I see white light, not the warm white of incandescent bulbs or the harsh white of fluorescence. This light has weight to it, pressing against my eyelids like fingers made of illumination. Sometimes the light moves, shifting and pulsing in patterns that feel almost like language, almost like communication. The dining room chair appears in my dreams. I'm sitting in it, but I'm not in my house. I'm somewhere else, somewhere that smells like ozone and tastes like metal. The chair is the only familiar thing in this place, and I grip its arms with hands that don't feel entirely like my own. Around me, the air shimmers with that same white light, and I can hear the buzzing, so much louder now, filling every space inside my head. The noise didn't come from outside. I've started leaving the house during the day, driving aimlessly through neighborhoods that look just like mine. Every street seems to curve in the same way, every mailbox painted the same shade of black. I park sometimes and sit in my car watching houses with their doors closed, their windows reflecting the sky like empty eyes. I wonder if the people inside have reports written about them too. I wonder if they read them every morning, searching for clues about their own lives. The missing knife bothers me more than it should. I remember buying the set, remember the weight of the box in my arms as I carried it home. 7 knives, each one fitting perfectly into its designated slot. Now there are 6, and the empty space seems to pulse with its own dark energy. I've considered buying a replacement, but something stops me. Some instinct that whispers this absence is important, that filling the gap would be a mistake. My reflection looks different in the kitchen window after dark. The glass shows me my face, but there's something behind my eyes that wasn't there before. A kind of knowing that I don't remember acquiring. When I lean closer to the window, my breath fogs the glass, and for a moment I can see shapes in the condensation. Geometric patterns that dissolve before I can fully comprehend them. The water from the faucet tastes electric. I cup it in my palms and drink, feeling it slide down my throat with a slight metallic burn. The sensation spreads through my chest, tingling along my ribs, settling in my stomach like swallowed lightning. I know I should fix the drip, but the sound has become a comfort now. A steady reminder that time is still moving forward, even when everything else feels suspended. There were lights behind the trees, moving lights that cast no shadows. The living room door swings open by itself sometimes. I'll be in the kitchen, listening to the drip and the buzz and the ticking, and I'll hear the soft creak of hinges. When I turn to look, the door is wide open, revealing the room beyond. The lamp is always on during these moments, and the light seems brighter, more insistent. I approach slowly, my bare feet silent on the hardwood, and pull the door back to its usual position. Ajar, never closed, never fully open. I've started talking to the empty spaces in my house, to the gap where the chair should be, to the hollow in the knife block, to the corner where the ticking seems strongest. My voice sounds strange in the cool air, muffled and distant, as if the words are being absorbed by something I can't see. Sometimes I think I hear responses, soft whispers that might be echoes or might be something else entirely. The report mentions recent activity, but I can't remember being active. My days blend together in a haze of buzzing and tingling and that persistent metallic taste. I find evidence of my presence everywhere. Coffee cups in the sink that I don't remember using, books moved from their usual places, footprints in the dust that's apparently not there, though I can see it clearly, covering every surface like a fine gray snow. My dreams are becoming more vivid. I'm in the chair again, but now I can see more of the space around me. Walls that curve impossibly, surfaces that reflect light in ways that hurt to perceive. The buzzing is so loud it's become a physical presence, pressing against my skin, vibrating through my bones. I try to stand, but the chair holds me gently, firmly, like the embrace of someone who knows me better than I know myself. I don't remember ever coming back, but I must have. I'm here after all, reading the report, touching the door frame, listening to the drip. The evidence of my return is everywhere, even if the memory of it has been carefully removed, filed away in some dark corner of my mind where I can't quite reach it. The lamp flickers again. This time I'm watching, and I see something in the brief moment of darkness. A shape that shouldn't be there, tall and patient, standing just at the edge of my vision. When the light steadies, the shape is gone, but the air tastes more metallic than before, and my skin tingles with renewed intensity. The thermostat still reads 72 degrees. I've stopped checking it, but I know what it says. Just like I know the water will drip every 4 seconds, and the knife will remain missing, and the door will stay ajar. These facts have become part of me, woven into the fabric of my daily existence like threads in a tapestry I can't quite see the pattern of. The noise didn't come from outside. It came from inside, from the spaces between the walls, from the gaps in my memory where something waits patiently to be remembered. The buzzing is getting louder now, more insistent, and I can feel it calling me back to that place where the chair waits and the light presses against everything with the weight of unspoken truths. I close my eyes and see the white light pulsing behind my lids. It's trying to show me something, trying to help me remember what I've forgotten. But remembering feels dangerous, like opening a door that was closed for good reason. Still, the light persists, patient and eternal, waiting for me to stop resisting and let the memory surface. The living room door is ajar. It's always ajar, suspended between open and closed, between invitation and barrier. I approach it now, feeling the familiar tingle in my fingertips as I reach for the handle. The buzzing grows louder with each step, and the air tastes so metallic I can barely breathe. There were lights behind the trees, and they're still there, waiting for me to remember how to see them. The door swings open under my touch, revealing the lamp and its dim light, the empty space where the chair should be, the shadows that dance just at the edge of perception. I step through the threshold, feeling the cool air wrap around me like a familiar embrace, and somewhere in the distance, I can hear the steady ticking of a clock that doesn't exist, counting down the moments until I remember everything I've worked so hard to forget. The living room door was ajar at the time of examination, and it will always be ajar, waiting for the next time I need to cross from one world to another, carrying nothing but the taste of metal and the sound of buzzing and the knowledge that some doors once opened can never truly be closed again. Story 6. The cabinet door was slightly ajar upon examination. The kitchen surfaces displayed neatness, with dishes methodically arranged in the drying rack, indicating recent cleaning activity. A faint layer of dust covered the tops of unused appliances, matching the dust level on the refrigerator door. Only one jar on the middle shelf was untouched by dust, sealed tightly. The garbage disposal was still warm to the touch, suggestive of recent use. Light fixtures were intact and functional, casting an even glow over the room. All windows remained locked from the inside, yet the floor bore a single, smudged footprint leading away from the pantry. I want to be clear about something right from the start. Nothing happened that night. I keep telling people this, but they look at me with those concerned expressions like I'm not telling the truth. But I am. Nothing happened. I was just tired, probably sleepwalking or something. People do that all the time. It's completely normal. I didn't see anything unusual when I went downstairs. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it after dinner. Clean, organized, everything in its place. I'm very particular about keeping things tidy. My mother always said a clean kitchen is a peaceful mind, and I've carried that with me. So when I found myself standing there in the middle of the night, everything looked perfectly ordinary. I must have been sleepwalking. That's the only logical explanation. I've never done it before, but there's a first time for everything, right? I probably just wandered down there in my sleep, maybe opened a cabinet or two, then went back to bed. It happens to millions of people. There's nothing strange about it. The footprint on the floor was mine, obviously. I mean, who else would it be? I live alone, and all the doors were locked, the windows too. I checked them myself the next morning, and they were all secure, just like I always leave them. That smudge was probably from when I was cleaning earlier. Sometimes when you mop, you miss a spot and it dries unevenly. That's all it was. I don't remember opening the pantry, but I must have. Maybe I was looking for a snack. Sometimes when you're half asleep, you do things without really thinking about them. Your body just goes through the motions. That's probably why the cabinet door was open. I was probably reaching for something on the middle shelf, maybe that jar of preserves I bought last month, though I don't remember touching it. The glass was still perfectly clean, not a fingerprint on it. The garbage disposal being warm doesn't mean anything either. Those things retain heat for hours after you use them. I probably ran it after dinner and just forgot. Memory can be funny like that, especially when you're tired. Sometimes you do things so automatically that your brain doesn't even register them. It's like driving to work and not remembering the trip. Completely normal. I keep telling myself this because it's true. Nothing unusual happened. I was just having trouble sleeping, so I went downstairs. Maybe I was going to make some warm milk or herbal tea, something to help me relax. That would explain why I was in the kitchen. It makes perfect sense. But I do remember the silence, not that there was anything wrong with it. Houses are quiet at night, that's normal. It's just that this silence felt different somehow. Thicker, like it was pressing against my eardrums, but that was probably just because I was tired and my senses were heightened. When you're exhausted, everything feels more intense. Sounds seem louder, or in this case, the absence of sound seems more complete. The light from the fixtures was casting shadows differently than usual, but that happens all the time. Depending on what time it is, the angle of moonlight coming through the windows can change how artificial light appears. It can make familiar spaces look strange. I'm sure that's what it was. The even glow looked almost deliberate, like someone had positioned each bulb to eliminate every possible dark corner. But that's ridiculous. Light fixtures don't move themselves. I wasn't scared. There was no reason to be scared. I was in my own home. Everything was secure and nothing was out of place. Well, almost nothing, just that one cabinet door, and like I said, I must have opened it myself. I probably closed it too, just not all the way. Sometimes the hinges are loose and doors don't shut completely. That's a perfectly reasonable explanation. The strange thing is, I can picture the inside of that cabinet so clearly. Not that there's anything strange about that. I mean, it's my cabinet. I put those items there myself. The canned goods on the bottom shelf, the boxes of pasta and rice in the middle, the specialty items up top, everything arranged by height and frequency of use. Very logical, very organized. But I can see it so precisely. The way the light fell across the labels, making some of them gleam while others remained in shadow. The small spider web in the upper corner that I'd been meaning to clean but kept forgetting about. The way one of the cereal boxes was turned slightly, so the cartoon character on the front seemed to be looking out at me. Though I don't remember turning it, I'm very careful about keeping all the labels facing forward. I definitely didn't hear any sounds. The house was completely quiet, just like it should be at night. No creaking floorboards, no settling noises, no hum from the refrigerator. Actually, that's odd. The refrigerator always hums. It's old and the compressor is loud. I've gotten so used to it that I barely notice it anymore. But that night, I don't remember hearing it at all. Maybe it was having one of those cycles where it shuts off for a while. They do that to regulate temperature. Though usually when it kicks back on, there's a distinct clicking sound, followed by that low mechanical hum. I know that sound intimately. I've been living with that refrigerator for years, but I don't remember hearing it cycle on while I was downstairs. The air felt different too. Not that there was anything wrong with it, just cooler than usual maybe. Though that doesn't make sense because I keep the thermostat at the same temperature every night. 68 degrees, very consistent, but there was definitely a chill in the kitchen. I remember getting goosebumps on my arms, even though I was wearing my heavy cotton pajamas. There was also this faint metallic smell. Probably just the scent of the sink fixtures or maybe something from the garbage disposal. Old food particles can create all sorts of odors, though I'm usually very careful about running plenty of water when I use the disposal, and I always follow up with baking soda to keep it fresh. But smells can linger. That's probably all it was. I didn't touch anything while I was down there, I'm sure of that. I just stood in the middle of the kitchen for a few minutes, maybe looking around, then went back upstairs. I definitely didn't touch the jar on the middle shelf. That's why it was still dust-free, because I hadn't disturbed it. The fact that everything else had a light coating of dust just proves how clean I keep things. Dust settles naturally over time. It's not like I use those appliances every day. Though I do remember the jar seeming different somehow. The glass looked almost luminous in the light from the fixtures, and the contents, which I'm pretty sure are strawberry preserves, appeared darker than usual, almost black, but that was probably just the lighting playing tricks on my eyes. Glass can be very reflective, and depending on the angle, it can distort what's inside. I certainly didn't open the jar. The seal was still intact, still tight. I could tell just by looking at it. You develop an eye for these things when you're organized. You can spot when something has been disturbed, and that jar definitely hadn't been touched, not by me anyway. The footprint on the floor was definitely mine. I compared it to my slipper the next morning, and it was a perfect match. Same size, same tread pattern. The only thing that was a little odd was how clear it was. Usually when you step on a clean floor, you don't leave much of a mark unless your feet are wet or dirty. But this print was quite distinct, like I'd stepped in something first. Maybe there was a small puddle somewhere. Sometimes the dishwasher leaks a tiny bit, or condensation drips from the refrigerator. I probably stepped in a little water without noticing, then left that print when I moved toward the pantry. That would explain the smudging too. Water can make your foot slide slightly, creating that blurred effect around the edges. I don't remember walking to the pantry specifically, but the footprint was pointing in that direction. Maybe I was going to check if I had any crackers or something. Sometimes when you can't sleep, a small snack helps, something light and simple, though I don't recall being hungry that night. The pantry door was closed when I found it the next morning. I always keep it closed, but there was something about the way it was positioned that seemed different, like someone had opened it, looked inside, then closed it again, but not quite the same way. The handle was turned slightly more to the left than I usually leave it. Just a few degrees, but enough to notice if you're paying attention. I must have opened it myself during my sleepwalking episode. That's the only explanation that makes sense. Maybe I was looking for something specific, something I needed for a midnight snack, though I can't imagine what that would be. I keep most of my quick foods in the regular cabinets, not the pantry. The strange thing is I can picture the inside of the pantry too, even though I don't remember opening it. All my bulk items arranged on metal shelving. Bags of flour and sugar on the bottom, canned goods in the middle, paper products up top, everything neat and accessible. But in my memory, or whatever this is, some of the items seem to be arranged differently. Like someone had been going through them, examining them, then putting them back in approximately the right places. But that's impossible. No one else has keys to my house. No one else was here that night. The doors were locked, the windows were secure. I checked everything twice the next morning. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been inside except me. I think what happened is that my mind is playing tricks on me. When you're tired and stressed, your brain can create false memories. It can take fragments of real experiences and rearrange them into something that feels like a memory but never actually happened. That's probably what this is. My subconscious combining elements of my normal kitchen routine with the disorientation of sleepwalking. The warmth from the garbage disposal was probably residual heat from dinner preparation. Those motors generate a lot of friction, and the metal housing can stay warm for hours. There's nothing unusual about that. I probably used it to dispose of vegetable scraps or something similar, then forgot about it by the time I went to bed. Though I do remember the warmth feeling different somehow, more like body heat than mechanical heat. When you touch a warm appliance, there's usually a distinct electrical quality to the temperature. But this felt more organic, more alive, but that's ridiculous. Garbage disposals don't have body heat, they're machines. I'm probably just overthinking this whole thing. People sleepwalk all the time. They go to familiar places, do familiar things, then return to bed without any conscious memory of it. It's a well-documented phenomenon. There's nothing mysterious or unusual about it. I just happened to go to the kitchen, maybe looked around for a snack, then went back upstairs. The fact that I can remember certain details so clearly is probably just my mind filling in gaps with logical assumptions. I know my kitchen intimately, so when I try to recall what happened, my brain supplies the most likely scenario. Of course, the cabinet would look the way I remember it. That's how it always looks. Of course, the pantry would be arranged a certain way. That's how I keep it organized. I've been sleeping much better since that night. Whatever was keeping me restless seems to have resolved itself. I haven't had any more episodes of sleepwalking, and I haven't found any more evidence of nighttime wandering. Everything has returned to normal. Though I did notice that the jar on the middle shelf has moved slightly. Not much, just a few inches to the left, but I'm sure I didn't move it. I haven't cooked anything that would require strawberry preserves, and I certainly haven't opened that cabinet for any other reason. It must have shifted on its own. Sometimes vibrations from traffic or settling can cause items to move gradually over time. The seal is still intact, still tight, but the contents look even darker now, almost black like I mentioned before. Strawberry preserves can darken with age, especially if they're exposed to light. Though that jar has been in the cabinet, away from direct light, so I'm not sure why it would change color. I keep meaning to check the expiration date, but every time I think about opening that cabinet, I find myself doing something else instead. It's like my mind just shifts to other priorities. There's always something more pressing to attend to. Laundry, cleaning, organizing other areas of the house. The kitchen can wait. Besides, everything is fine now. Whatever happened that night, if anything happened at all, it's over. I'm sleeping well, eating regularly, maintaining my normal routines. There's no reason to dwell on what was probably just a minor sleep disturbance. Though I've been hearing that silence again lately, not every night, but sometimes when I'm lying in bed, the house becomes extraordinarily quiet. Even the refrigerator seems to hold its breath, and I find myself listening, waiting for something, though I'm not sure what. Last night I thought I heard footsteps in the kitchen, very soft, very careful, like someone trying not to wake me. But when I got up to check, everything was exactly as I'd left it. All the cabinets closed, all the appliances in their proper places. The jar on the middle shelf still sitting in its new position, contents still dark, seal still intact. I'm sure it was just the house settling. Old houses make all sorts of noises. Creaking wood, shifting foundations, temperature changes causing materials to expand and contract. It's perfectly normal. There's no reason to be concerned. Though as I was heading back upstairs, I could have sworn I smelled that metallic scent again, faint but distinct, and the garbage disposal felt warm when I brushed against it accidentally, but I definitely hadn't used it that evening. I'd eaten a simple dinner, nothing that required disposal of scraps. I'm probably just being overly sensitive. When you're focused on something, you tend to notice details that would normally escape your attention. It's like when you buy a new car and suddenly see that same model everywhere. Your brain becomes attuned to specific patterns. Everything is normal. My kitchen is clean and organized. My routines are consistent. My sleep is improving. There's no reason to think anything unusual is happening. And even if something were happening, which it isn't, I'm sure it would resolve itself naturally. Tonight, I'm planning to go to bed early and get a full night's rest. I've been working hard lately, and fatigue can cause all sorts of minor disturbances. A good night's sleep will clear my head and put an end to these strange little episodes. I just hope I don't find myself standing in the kitchen again, staring at that cabinet door, wondering why it's slightly ajar. Story 7. The bathroom mirror glistened under the dim light, framed by beads of moisture from the hot shower. The air was thick with the scent of lavender soap, a comforting aroma that clung to the skin. On the tiled floor, a single droplet of water lay suspended, refusing to follow the path of gravity. The clock ticked softly, its sound absorbed by the steam, and yet there was an absence that pulled at the edges of my consciousness. I glanced back at the mirror, expecting to see my reflection staring back, only to find the surface completely empty. That memory comes to me now, even though I'm sitting here thousands of miles away from that place. I've been carrying this story inside me for so long that it feels like a weight pressing against my ribs. For years, I told myself I would never speak about what happened. Not to friends, not to family, not even to myself in the quiet hours before dawn when sleep refused to come. But I can't keep it locked away anymore. My hands shake as I speak these words, and I find myself looking over my shoulder even though I know I'm alone in this room. The walls here are different, painted a soft blue that should feel calming. The windows face east, letting in morning light that feels clean and ordinary. This should be my sanctuary, my safe place, yet somehow I still feel like I'm being watched. I need to tell you what happened, even though part of me knows that speaking it aloud might make it real again in ways I'm not prepared for. It started during what should have been the most ordinary time of my life. I was house-sitting for someone who'd gone away for an extended trip. The place was modest, comfortable, with hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot and windows that let in generous amounts of natural light. I remember feeling grateful for the solitude, the chance to step away from the noise of my regular life and just exist quietly for a while. The house sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees. During the day, I could hear children playing in neighboring yards, the distant hum of lawnmowers, the occasional bark of a friendly dog. Everything felt normal, predictable, safe. I fell into a routine quickly. Morning coffee by the kitchen window, afternoons reading in the living room chair, evenings cooking simple meals while listening to music. For the first few weeks, nothing seemed out of place. I watered the plants, collected the mail, kept the house tidy just as I'd promised. The refrigerator hummed its familiar tune, the grandfather clock in the hallway marked each hour with its gentle chime, and at night the house settled into itself with the soft groans that old buildings make. But then I started noticing things that didn't quite fit. It began with the electronics. The television would turn itself on in the middle of the night, always tuned to static. Not the black screen you'd expect, but that grainy, dancing pattern of white and gray dots that used to fill empty channels. I'd wake to the sound of that soft hissing, like rain against windows, and stumble downstairs to find the living room bathed in that cold, flickering light. The first time it happened, I blamed a faulty remote or an electrical surge. I unplugged the set before going back to bed, thinking that would solve the problem. But the next night it happened again. The television was still unplugged, yet somehow it had turned on, casting that same eerie glow across the room. I started keeping a small notebook, writing down each incident. Looking back now, I realize I was trying to find patterns, logical explanations that would let me sleep peacefully again. The entries started simple: TV on again, 3 a.m., radio in kitchen playing static, volume low, microwave clock blinking, power never went out. What disturbed me most wasn't that these things were happening, but how they made me feel. Whenever I encountered one of these electronic anomalies, my skin would break out in goosebumps that had nothing to do with temperature. My chest would tighten as if the air itself had become thicker, harder to breathe. Sometimes I'd catch a scent in the air during these moments, something sweet and metallic, like copper pennies mixed with honey. I tried to rationalize everything. Old house, old wiring, maybe some kind of electromagnetic interference from nearby power lines. I even called an electrician, who spent an afternoon checking outlets and connections. He found nothing wrong, just shrugged and suggested I contact the power company if the problems continued. But the problems weren't really with the power, were they? They were with something else entirely, something I wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. The sound started a few weeks later. At first I thought it was the house settling, or maybe small animals in the walls. A soft scratching that seemed to move from room to room, always just at the edge of hearing. I'd pause whatever I was doing and listen carefully, but the moment I focused on it, the sound would stop. Then came the humming, low and constant, like the drone of distant machinery. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sometimes it would shift in pitch, climbing higher until it reached a frequency that made my teeth ache, then dropping back down to that barely perceptible bass note that I felt more than heard. I found myself spending more time outside during the day, walking around the neighborhood, sitting on park benches, anything to escape that persistent drone. But even when I was blocks away, I could still feel it somehow, like a vibration in my bones that wouldn't fade. The neighbors began to seem different too, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly how. The woman who lived across the street used to wave when she saw me in the yard. Now she would just stand at her window, perfectly still, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The elderly man who walked his dog past the house every evening started taking a different route, crossing to the other side of the street well before reaching the property. I told myself I was being paranoid, that isolation was making me see threats where none existed. But deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The house felt different now, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl and my heart race for no reason I could name. The breaking point came on a night when the air was unusually still. I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from another day of electronic malfunctions and that constant, maddening hum. I must have been asleep for several hours when I woke to the sound of water running. At first, I thought I'd left a faucet dripping, but as I lay there listening, I realized the sound was coming from the bathroom down the hall. Not a drip, but a steady flow, as if someone had turned on the shower full blast. I got up and walked toward the bathroom, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The door was closed, which was strange because I always left it open. Light seeped out from underneath, that harsh fluorescent glow that made everything look sickly and pale. I pressed my ear to the door and heard not just water running, but something else. A sound like breathing, deep and rhythmic, echoing off the tiled walls. My hand froze on the doorknob as I realized that someone or something was in there. Every instinct told me to run, to leave the house immediately and never come back. But I needed to know. I needed to see what was behind that door, even though part of me already suspected that some knowledge comes with a price too high to pay. I turned the handle slowly and pushed the door open. The bathroom was exactly as I'd left it, except for one impossible detail. The shower was running, filling the small space with steam and that sweet, metallic scent I'd been noticing for weeks. The mirror above the sink was fogged with condensation, and water pooled on the floor in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. But there was no one there, no one taking a shower, no one breathing in that deep, rhythmic way I'd heard through the door. Just an empty bathroom filled with steam and the sound of running water. I stepped inside, my feet splashing through the puddles on the floor, and reached for the shower handle. The metal was ice cold despite the hot water that had been running for who knows how long. As I turned it off, the sudden silence felt more oppressive than the noise had been. That's when I saw it. In the fogged mirror, something was moving. Not my reflection, but something else entirely. A shape that seemed to shift and writhe behind the condensation, pressing against the glass from the other side as if trying to break through. I wiped the mirror with my hand, clearing away the moisture in one quick motion. For just a moment I saw my own face staring back at me, pale and terrified. But in that instant before the fog began to reform, I could have sworn I saw something else looking over my shoulder. Something that shouldn't have been there, something that made every nerve in my body scream with primitive terror. I ran from that bathroom, from that house, into the night wearing nothing but the clothes I'd thrown on in my panic. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, where I called for help from a gas station, payphone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I never went back to collect my things. I never spoke to the homeowner about what had happened. I just disappeared from that place as completely as I could, moving far away to start over somewhere new. But starting over isn't as simple as changing your address. The experience followed me, woven into my dreams and embedded in my nervous system like a virus I couldn't shake. I found myself avoiding mirrors, especially in steamy bathrooms. Electronic devices still make me uncomfortable, their screens and speakers seeming to watch and listen with malevolent intent. The smell comes back sometimes, that sweet metallic scent that has no source I can identify. When it happens, my chest tightens and my skin breaks out in goosebumps, and I know that whatever I encountered in that house is still with me somehow, still watching from just beyond the edge of perception. I've tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, a psychological break brought on by isolation and stress. but explanations don't erase the memory of that shape moving behind the fogged glass, or the certainty I felt that something inhuman was sharing that space with me. Even now, as I finish telling you this story, I can feel that familiar pressure in my chest. The air in this room has grown thick and hard to breathe, and there's a sweetness creeping into my nostrils that makes my stomach turn. I keep glancing at the mirror on the wall behind me, afraid of what I might see reflected there. I thought that by speaking about it, by finally letting these words out into the world, I might find some kind of peace. But I realize now that some experiences don't fade with time or distance. They become part of you, changing the fundamental frequency at which you vibrate, marking you in ways that can never be undone. The humming has started again, that low drone that seems to come from inside my own bones. And I have the terrible suspicion that by telling you this story, by giving voice to what should have remained silent, I may have opened a door that was meant to stay closed forever. Story 8. The corridor light was non-functional upon inspection. Entry was executed without resistance as the lock was unengaged. Surveillance failed to capture any unauthorized passage in recorded hours, yet the motion sensor logs showed intermittent activations. The linoleum floor exhibited no visible contaminants, and all standard furnishing remained undisturbed. A faint scent of ammonia permeated, inconsistent with the documented cleaning schedule. Standard swabs yielded minimal trace evidence, confirming recent sanitation, although no personnel had registered work in this area. The sound detectors, however, had not recorded a single step. I need to be clear about something from the start. Nothing happened that night. I was never in that building, and I certainly didn't see anything unusual. The whole thing was probably just a dream, one of those vivid ones that stick with you for no good reason. I've been having trouble sleeping lately, so that explains everything. There's nothing more to it than that. I remember being at home, watching television until late. Must have been around 11 or so when I finally went to bed. The next morning I woke up feeling tired, like I hadn't slept well. That's all there was to it. Simple as that. No mystery, no strange occurrences. Just a restless night and maybe some weird dreams that felt too real. But I keep thinking about that hallway. Not that I was actually there, of course. It's just something my mind conjured up while I was sleeping. The fluorescent lights were all dead, hanging there like broken teeth in the darkness. The emergency lighting cast everything in that sickly red glow, but even that seemed dimmer than it should have been. The shadows fell wrong somehow, pooling in corners that shouldn't have existed. I wasn't walking down that corridor. I was safe in my bed the entire time. But in the dream, my footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was being absorbed by something that shouldn't have been there. The linoleum was that institutional green color, the kind you see in hospitals and government buildings. It was perfectly clean, recently mopped, but my shoes left no wet prints even though I could feel the dampness through the soles. The ammonia smell was overwhelming, not the usual cleaning product scent, but something sharper, more chemical. It burned the inside of my nose and made my eyes water. I had to breathe through my mouth, but even then I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and wrong. Of course, I wasn't really smelling anything because I was asleep in my own room, where the air was perfectly normal. There were doors along both sides of the hallway, standard office doors with those small rectangular windows, but they were all dark inside. I didn't look through any of them. I wouldn't have wanted to see what was beyond the glass anyway, not that there was anything to see. It was just my imagination filling in details that didn't exist, creating a space that was never real. The silence was the worst part of the dream, not the normal quiet you'd expect in an empty building, but something deliberate and heavy. It pressed against my eardrums like I was underwater. Even my breathing seemed muffled, though I could feel my heart beating too fast in my chest. The sound of my pulse was the only thing that felt real, but that doesn't mean anything because none of it was actually happening. I never reached the end of that hallway because there was no hallway to reach the end of. But if I had continued walking, I know I would have found the elevator bank. 3 elevators, all with their call buttons dark. The middle one had its doors slightly open, just a crack, but wide enough to see that the interior walls were painted that institutional blue color. Not sky blue or navy, but something in between that made your stomach turn just looking at it. I didn't press the call button. I didn't step closer to peer through that gap in the doors. I certainly didn't hear the soft mechanical humming coming from inside the elevator shaft, like machinery running when it should have been idle. The building was supposed to be empty after all, not that I was actually in any building. I was home, sleeping soundly, having a perfectly normal night's rest. The air conditioning wasn't running, but I could feel air moving through the vents anyway. It was warm air, too warm for the season, and it carried that same chemical smell but stronger. When I looked up at the ceiling tiles, some of them were slightly askew, as if someone had been moving through the space above. But the tiles were white and clean, recently replaced, which didn't make sense if the building was as old as it seemed. My hands were shaking, but only from the cold. The building's heating system must have been turned off, though the air felt warm against my skin. I was sweating despite the chill, and my clothes stuck to my back in uncomfortable ways. I kept wiping my palms on my pants, but they stayed damp no matter what I did. Not that any of this really happened, of course. It was just my sleeping mind creating sensations that felt real but weren't. I turned around to leave, to go back the way I came, but the hallway behind me looked different now. Longer than it had been before, stretching further into darkness than should have been possible. The red emergency lights seemed dimmer, barely illuminating anything at all. I could have sworn the corridor had been straight when I entered, but now it curved slightly to the left, disappearing around a corner that hadn't existed moments earlier. That's when I started walking faster, not running exactly, but moving with purpose toward what I hoped was the exit. My footsteps sounded different now, sharper and more distinct, as if the acoustic properties of the space had changed. The echo came back wrong, like the sound was bouncing off surfaces that weren't there or being absorbed by materials that shouldn't exist. I found the stairwell eventually. The door was heavy, heavier than it should have been, and it opened with a soft whoosh of air pressure equalizing. The stairs went both up and down, but I couldn't see very far in either direction. The emergency lighting here was even dimmer, barely functional. I went down, taking the steps 2 at a time, my hands sliding along the metal railing that was somehow warm to the touch despite the cool air. But I never used any stairwell because I was never in that building. I was home the entire time, safe in my own bed, having a dream that felt too vivid for comfort. Dreams can be like that sometimes, especially when you're stressed or not sleeping well. They create experiences that seem completely real while you're having them, complete with smells and sounds and physical sensations that your mind manufactures from nothing. The ground floor lobby was different from what I expected. Not that I had any expectations, since I wasn't really there. But in the dream, it was smaller than it should have been, with a low ceiling and fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently. The security desk was unmanned, of course, but there were coffee cups still sitting there, still warm, as if someone had just stepped away for a moment. I walked past the desk without stopping to investigate. I didn't want to know who had been sitting there or where they had gone. The front doors were glass, but they were tinted so dark that I couldn't see outside. When I pushed against them, they didn't budge. Locked from the inside, which didn't make any sense for a building that was supposed to be accessible to emergency personnel. That's when I noticed the cameras. They were in every corner, small black domes that reflected the flickering fluorescent light. The red recording lights were all active, blinking in a pattern that seemed almost rhythmic. I found myself counting the intervals between blinks, but the pattern kept changing just when I thought I had figured it out. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, then back to 1, then 5, then 2 again. I wasn't being recorded because I wasn't there. The cameras were just part of the dream landscape, details my subconscious mind added to make the experience feel more real. But I kept my head down anyway, avoiding looking directly at the lenses. I didn't want to see my own reflection in that dark glass, didn't want to confirm that I was actually present in that space. The side exit was unlocked, thankfully. I pushed through the door and found myself in an alley that smelled like rain and garbage. The pavement was wet, though I couldn't remember hearing any rain while I was inside. The streetlights cast long shadows between the buildings, and the air was thick with humidity that made my clothes stick to my skin even more than they already had been. I walked quickly toward the street, not looking back at the building behind me. I didn't want to see if there were lights on in windows that should have been dark, or if anyone was watching from those tinted glass doors. The sound of my footsteps on the wet pavement was reassuring, normal in a way that the corridor sounds hadn't been. But when I reached the corner and finally did look back, the building looked exactly as it should have. Dark windows, no signs of activity, just another empty office complex in a row of similar structures. The kind of place where nothing interesting ever happens, where people go to work and leave and forget about until the next day. Perfectly ordinary and completely unremarkable. I walked home through streets that seemed quieter than usual, though that might have been because of the late hour, or early hour depending on how you looked at it. The streetlights hummed softly overhead, and occasionally a car would pass, its headlights sweeping across the pavement before disappearing around a corner. Everything was normal, exactly as it should have been. When I got home, I went straight to bed without turning on any lights. I didn't want to see my reflection in the bathroom mirror, didn't want to notice if my clothes were damp or if I smelled like ammonia and industrial cleaning products. I just wanted to sleep and forget about the whole experience, to let it fade away like dreams are supposed to do. But I keep thinking about those elevator doors, slightly open, showing that blue interior that no one should ever have to see. I keep remembering the warmth of the metal railing and the way the emergency lights cast shadows that fell in impossible directions. Most of all, I keep thinking about those cameras and their blinking red lights, recording everything in a pattern that almost made sense but never quite did. None of it was real, of course. I was never in that building, never walked down that hallway, never felt that wrongness in the air or heard those sounds that weren't quite right. It was just a dream, vivid and unsettling, but ultimately meaningless. The kind of thing that happens when your mind processes stress and anxiety during sleep, creating scenarios that feel significant but aren't. I've been sleeping better lately. The dreams have mostly stopped, or at least I don't remember them as clearly when I wake up. Everything has returned to normal, exactly as it should be. I go to work, come home, watch television, and sleep soundly through the night. There's nothing unusual about my routine, nothing that would suggest any kind of ongoing problem or unresolved experience. But sometimes, when I'm walking past office buildings late at night, I find myself looking at the windows and wondering if the lights inside are working properly. I notice when security desks are unmanned and when elevator call buttons are dark. I pay attention to the sound of my footsteps on different types of flooring and the way emergency lighting casts shadows in empty corridors. Not because I'm looking for anything specific, of course, just normal observations that anyone might make. There's nothing significant about noticing these details, nothing that connects them to experiences that never happened in places I never visited. It's just the kind of thing you become aware of when you spend time in buildings during off hours, which everyone does occasionally for perfectly ordinary reasons. The important thing is that nothing happened that night. I was home, safe in my bed, having dreams that felt more real than they should have but weren't actually real at all. There's no mystery to solve, no experience to process or understand. Just a sleeping mind creating scenarios from fragments of memory and imagination, the way sleeping minds have always done. Everything is perfectly normal now. I sleep well, work productively, and live my life without any lingering effects from experiences that never occurred. There's no reason to think about institutional green linoleum or the taste of ammonia in the air or the sound of machinery running in empty elevator shafts. Those details belong to a dream that's already fading, becoming less distinct with each passing day. But I did notice yesterday that the building on 5th Street has been showing lights in its windows again during the overnight hours, and the security company van has been parked outside more frequently than usual. Not that it means anything, of course. Buildings require maintenance, and security systems need regular updates and testing. Perfectly normal business operations that happen all the time without any particular significance. I'm sure I'll sleep soundly tonight, just like I have been. No dreams, no unusual experiences, nothing that would suggest any kind of ongoing situation that requires attention or investigation. Just normal, restful sleep in my own bed in my own home, where everything is exactly as it should be. Though I do hope they fix those motion sensors soon. The intermittent activations are probably just a technical glitch, but it's the kind of thing that should be addressed before it becomes a bigger problem. Story 9. I had just placed the cup on the table, noting its warmth which lingered against my palm. The faintest creak whispered beneath my feet, softer than rustling leaves, hinting at a hesitation in the old wood of the floor. My skin prickled as if it were listening more closely than my ears ever could. I paused, and the air seemed to hold its breath alongside me. The walls shifted slightly in the fading light, casting shadows that felt unfamiliar. And then, just as suddenly, the floorboards felt uneven in an unsettling way, a tilt I hadn't noticed before. That memory comes back to me now with perfect clarity, which is strange because everything else from that period feels like trying to grasp smoke. I know something happened to me, something significant enough to leave gaps in my recollection, holes that seem too precise to be accidental. When I try to remember what came after that moment with the cup, my mind slides away from it like water off glass. I've been different since then, not in ways that others would notice, but in small, persistent ways that gnaw at me. My reflection sometimes takes a fraction too long to catch up with my movements. I find myself checking locks twice, 3 times, though I can't remember why I started doing that. And there's this persistent sensation that I'm being observed, even when I'm completely alone. The first real clue came when I was going through old files on my computer. Buried in a folder I didn't remember creating was an audio recording. The file name was just a string of numbers that meant nothing to me, but when I saw it, my pulse quickened in a way that felt like recognition. I hesitated before playing it. My finger hovered over the mouse, and for a moment I couldn't understand my own reluctance. It was just a sound file, but something deep in my chest was telling me not to listen, the same way you might feel standing at the edge of a cliff. When I finally clicked play, I heard my own voice, but distorted somehow, like I was speaking through water or from a great distance. The audio quality was poor, filled with a low static that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I was describing something, my voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. "The lights keep changing," my recorded voice said. "They're not electric lights. They move wrong. They respond to something I can't see." I stopped the recording. I had no memory of making it, none at all. but hearing those words triggered something, a flash of sensation rather than true memory. I could almost feel those lights on my skin, cold and somehow wet, shifting across surfaces in patterns that hurt to follow. Over the following days, I found more evidence of my missing time. Notes written in my handwriting that I didn't remember writing. Short phrases scattered on scraps of paper. The frequency is wrong. It knows I'm watching. The door was open when I came back. Each discovery brought with it a fragment of sensation. Not quite memory, but something more primitive. The taste of copper in my mouth. The feeling of fabric that was simultaneously rough and slippery. A sound like breathing, but too deep, too slow for human lungs. I tried to piece together a timeline, but the fragments refused to form a coherent sequence. Instead, they layered over each other like double-exposed photographs, creating an image that was somehow more disturbing than any single clear picture could have been. One fragment came back to me while I was washing dishes. The warm water on my hands triggered it, though I still don't understand the connection. Suddenly I was remembering darkness, complete and absolute, but not empty. Something was moving in that darkness, something large enough to displace air, to create currents I could feel against my face. The power had gone out, that much was clear, but not just the electricity in my house, everything. No streetlights visible through the windows, no distant glow from neighboring buildings. A darkness so complete it felt physical, like being wrapped in thick cloth. And in that darkness I had heard something that wasn't quite a voice, more like the memory of speech, words formed by something that had observed language but never truly understood it. The sounds were almost familiar, almost meaningful, but wrong in a way that made my teeth ache. I remember reaching for my phone, its screen the only source of light, but when I looked at it, the display showed symbols I didn't recognize. Not letters or numbers, but shapes that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The phone felt heavier than it should have, and warm in a way that suggested something alive. That's when I heard the breathing behind me. Not human breathing, the rhythm was all wrong, too regular, like a machine attempting to mimic life. Each exhale carried that scent I'm still trying to identify, something like new plastic mixed with the metallic taste of blood, but colder somehow, sterile and organic at the same time. I remember turning around, or trying to, but in the complete darkness, I couldn't tell if I was actually moving or just thinking about moving. The sensation of rotation without visual reference points created a vertigo that made me question whether up and down still meant anything. The breathing continued, neither getting closer nor moving away. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the darkness itself had developed lungs. Now, as I write this, I can feel that presence again. Not behind me this time, but somewhere to my left, just outside my peripheral vision. When I turn to look, there's nothing there, but the feeling persists. It's like being watched by something that doesn't have eyes in any sense I understand. I found another recording yesterday, this one video. The file was corrupted, mostly static, but there were moments of clarity that I wish I could unsee. The camera was pointing at my ceiling, but the ceiling looked wrong. The familiar texture of painted plaster had been replaced by something that seemed to ripple, like the surface of disturbed water. In the video, lights moved across this impossible ceiling. Not the warm glow of bulbs or the harsh brightness of fluorescence, but something that seemed to generate darkness as much as illumination. They pulsed in patterns that felt almost like communication, but in a language that bypassed my conscious mind and spoke directly to something more primitive. My voice on the recording was different, calmer than it should have been, given what I was apparently witnessing. I was narrating the movement of the lights with clinical detachment, as if I were documenting a weather pattern rather than something that defied every law of physics I understood. The third sequence is repeating, my recorded voice observed. It's waiting for acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of what? I have no memory of understanding what those lights wanted, but something in my tone suggested I had known. More disturbing was the implication that I had been communicating with them, participating in some kind of exchange I can no longer remember. The video ended abruptly, cutting to black in the middle of a sentence. But in that final frame, I caught something that made me replay the footage dozens of times. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was what looked like a reflection. Not in a mirror or window, but somehow embedded in the air itself, as if space had developed reflective properties. The reflection showed my face, but wrong. My expression was one of concentration, but my eyes were looking in a direction that didn't match where I was pointing the camera. It was as if I were seeing something the camera couldn't capture, or as if the reflection was showing a slightly different moment than the one being recorded. Since finding that video, my reflections have been behaving strangely. Not dramatically, nothing that would be obvious to a casual observer, but I've started to notice small delays, tiny discrepancies. When I raise my hand, my reflection sometimes begins the movement a fraction of a second early, as if it knows what I'm going to do before I do. The most disturbing fragment came to me this morning. I was making coffee, going through the familiar routine, when the smell of the brewing grounds triggered something vivid and terrible. I remembered being in my kitchen, but not my kitchen. The same layout, the same appliances, but everything was somehow inverted. Not mirror reversed, but wrong in a more fundamental way. The light came from below instead of above, casting shadows upward that pooled on the ceiling like dark water. In this impossible version of my kitchen, I was not alone. Something stood where I should have been standing, wearing my shape but not my substance. It moved with my gestures but without my intent, like a recording being played back with subtle errors in timing. We were facing each other across a space that was both familiar and completely alien. I could see myself from the outside, could observe my own face wearing an expression of acceptance that terrified me, because I could remember feeling that acceptance, remember agreeing to something without understanding what I was agreeing to. The thing wearing my shape was holding something in its hand, small, dark, irregular. It pulsed with its own rhythm, like a heart made of shadow. And as I watched, my other self opened its mouth and placed the object inside, swallowing it with a satisfaction that was absolutely not my own. That's when I woke up, if waking is the right word for returning from a memory that felt more real than the present moment. But the taste lingered in my mouth, metallic and cold, like I had been the one to swallow that impossible object. I've been checking my throat obsessively since then, running my fingers along my neck, feeling for any unusual lumps or irregularities. There's nothing there, nothing I can detect, but the sensation of having swallowed something alien persists. The fragments are coming more frequently now, triggered by increasingly mundane stimuli. The sound of my refrigerator humming brings back the memory of mechanical breathing. The way light reflects off my bathroom mirror shows me glimpses of that rippling ceiling. Even the texture of fabric against my skin sometimes feels like that strange combination of rough and slippery that I can't quite place. I found one more note yesterday, tucked inside a book I don't remember reading. Just a single line in my handwriting. It's not finished with me yet. Reading those words brought with it the strongest fragment yet. Not a memory of something that happened, but a memory of something that is still happening. A process that began during those lost hours and continues now, invisibly, inevitably. I can feel it working in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats. Something is being slowly, carefully extracted from me, while something else is being just as carefully inserted, not into my body, but into the spaces where my body meets the world around it. The boundaries are becoming permeable. When I touch surfaces now, I sometimes feel them touching me back with an awareness that objects shouldn't possess. When I look in mirrors, I occasionally see rooms that aren't quite the room I'm standing in, reflections of spaces that exist parallel to but not identical with my own. And sometimes in the quiet moments just before sleep, I can hear that breathing again. Not behind me now, but inside me, as if something has taken up residence in my lungs and is learning to breathe with my rhythm. I know I should be more frightened than I am. The calm I feel when these fragments surface is not natural, not my own. It's the same acceptance I saw in my other self's face, the same willingness to participate in something I don't understand. But understanding, I'm beginning to realize, was never the point. Understanding requires a kind of distance, an ability to step back and observe. What's happening to me requires the opposite. It requires a dissolution of the boundaries between observer and observed, between self and other. The cup is still on the table where I left it. The coffee inside has long since gone cold, but I haven't moved it. Because I'm beginning to suspect that moving it would complete something, would close a circuit that was opened when I first placed it there. And I'm not ready for that completion, not yet, because once that circuit closes, once the process that began in my missing hours reaches its conclusion, I have the feeling that the person writing these words will be someone else entirely. Someone who remembers everything, but is no longer quite me. The breathing is getting stronger now, more synchronized with my own. Soon, I think, there won't be any difference between us at all. Is that what I agreed to, in that inverted kitchen with my impossible other self? Story 10. The morning air was crisp, the fragrance of damp earth rising as mist clung to the edges of the forest. Leaves whispered secrets underfoot, tracing patterns of yesteryear on the paved path. Sunlight dappled through branches, casting a grid of light and shadow across the garden. A single curtain fluttered gently in the breeze, stirring as if in conversation with the world outside. On the porch, a rocking chair moved ever so slightly, swaying without a touch. Inside, beyond the glass eyes of the old house, everything paused, suspended in a moment that strained with anticipation. I remember waking to the taste of copper pennies on my tongue. The sheets were damp, not with sweat, but with something else. Something that left my skin feeling charged like the air before a thunderstorm. My fingertips buzzed against the fabric, and when I pressed them to my temples, the buzzing moved inward, settling behind my eyes like a tuning fork struck against bone. There was a sound, always the same sound. A low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the floorboards, through the walls, through my chest cavity until my ribs felt like they might crack from the resonance. I would lie there, eyes closed, trying to place it. The refrigerator downstairs, the heating system, the power lines outside my window. But the sound was too clean for machinery, too purposeful. The curtain in my bedroom window moved without wind. I watched it for hours sometimes, the way it would lift and fall in a rhythm that matched my breathing. When I held my breath, it would pause. When I exhaled, it would flutter again, as if something behind the glass was mimicking me. I don't remember when the dreams started blending with waking. There were mornings I would find myself standing in the kitchen, barefoot on cold linoleum, holding a glass of water I didn't remember getting. The water would be warm, too warm, and when I'd set it down, my reflection in its surface would ripple long after my hand had moved away. The rocking chair on the porch kept moving. I would watch it from the kitchen window while coffee brewed, counting the slow arcs back and forth. 7 rocks forward, pause, 7 rocks back, always 7. When I finally worked up the courage to go outside and stop it, my hand would freeze inches from the armrest. The wood looked normal, weathered and gray, but something in my peripheral vision would shift, and I'd find myself backing away, back through the door, back to the window where I could watch safely from behind glass. There were lights behind the trees. Not every night, just the nights when the humming grew louder, when the air in my bedroom became so thick I could barely breathe. I would press my face to the window, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the reflection, and there they would be. Pinpricks of white light moving between the trunks, too steady to be fireflies, too bright to be anything natural. The lights never came closer, they never went away. I started keeping a journal, trying to map the pattern. When did the humming start? When did the lights appear? When did I wake up with that metallic taste coating my mouth like I'd been sucking on batteries? But every morning the pages would be blank, not erased, not torn out, just blank, as if I'd never written anything at all. My skin began to remember things my mind couldn't. A tingling along my left shoulder blade that would start without warning, spreading down my arm until my fingers went numb. I would twist in front of the bathroom mirror, craning my neck to see if there was a mark, a bruise, anything to explain the sensation. But the skin was always smooth, unmarked, though sometimes it seemed to shimmer in the fluorescent light like oil on water. The house held its breath during those moments. Every creak would stop, every settling sound would pause. Even the refrigerator's hum would fade to nothing, leaving only that other sound, that purposeful vibration that seemed to be waiting for something. I would stand frozen in the bathroom, watching my reflection, and for just a moment my eyes would look different, whiter, darker, like someone else was looking back. I don't remember ever coming back. But I must have gone somewhere, because there were mornings I would wake fully dressed, shoes still on my feet, dirt under my fingernails that didn't match the soil in my garden. The sheets would be pulled tight, hospital corners perfect, as if someone else had made the bed around me while I slept. The curtain knew things I didn't. It would flutter in specific patterns now, lifting and falling in sequences that felt like Morse code, like sign language, like some kind of communication I was supposed to understand but couldn't quite grasp. I bought a small fan, positioned it near the window, told myself the air circulation was causing the movement. But the curtain ignored the artificial breeze, continuing its purposeful dance while the fan pushed air uselessly around the room. There was a door I'd never noticed before. Halfway down the hall between the bathroom and the bedroom, a door that should have led to a closet but felt wrong somehow. The wood was a different color, darker, and when I pressed my ear against it, I could hear that humming sound more clearly, as if it was coming from whatever space lay beyond. I never tried to open it. My hands would reach for the knob, fingers brushing the cold metal, but something would always stop me. A sound from downstairs, a phone ringing, the curtain fluttering more urgently in my peripheral vision, and I would step back, telling myself I'd check later, knowing I never would. The noise didn't come from outside. It came from inside my head, inside my bones, inside the spaces between my thoughts where memories should have been but weren't. Sometimes I would catch myself humming along, the same low frequency vibrating in my throat, and when I'd stop, the silence would feel wrong, incomplete, like I'd interrupted something important. The lights in the forest were getting brighter. Not just white now, but shifting through colors I didn't have names for, hues that made my eyes water and my teeth ache. I would watch them from my bedroom window, and sometimes I would find myself raising my hand, fingers spread against the glass, as if I was waving back at something that was waving at me. Time moved differently on those nights. I would look at the clock and see midnight blink and find dawn creeping through the curtains. Or I would watch the sun set, go to make dinner, and discover it was still afternoon, the shadows falling in the wrong direction, the light too bright for the hour displayed on every timepiece in the house. My reflection started arriving late. In the bathroom mirror, in the dark window glass, in the surface of that warm water I kept finding in my hands. I would move, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, my reflection would lag behind, catching up like an echo of motion rather than a simultaneous copy. The rocking chair was rocking faster now. Still 7 rocks forward, 7 back, but the rhythm was quickening, becoming urgent, almost frantic. The wood creaked with each movement, a sound that harmonized with the humming in my head until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I found footprints in the garden. Not mine, too small, too narrow, with an odd spacing between the toes that made my stomach clench when I looked at them too closely. They led from the forest edge to the porch, then stopped, as if whoever made them had simply vanished at the front door. The curtain was teaching me something. Each flutter was a lesson, each pause a punctuation mark in a language I was slowly beginning to understand. It would lift when the humming grew louder, fall when the lights in the forest shifted color, twist when that tingling sensation spread across my shoulder blade like invisible fingers tracing patterns on my skin. I started sleeping during the day. The humming was quieter then, the lights in the forest invisible against the bright sky. But even in daylight, the house felt different, expectant, like it was waiting for something to happen. The door in the hallway would creak sometimes, just once, as if someone had leaned against it from the other side. The metallic taste was getting stronger. Not just when I woke up now, but throughout the day, coating my tongue until everything I ate tasted like pennies and ozone. I would brush my teeth until my gums bled, rinse with mouthwash until my eyes watered, but the taste would return within minutes, familiar and wrong. There were moments when I wasn't alone. Not visible presence, but the sense of someone standing just outside my field of vision, matching my movements, breathing in rhythm with my lungs. When I would turn to look, there would be nothing, but the air would still hold the shape of something that had been there, like the space around a recently moved object. The lights were calling to me now. I could feel the pull in my chest, a gentle tugging that grew stronger each night, urging me toward the window, toward the door, toward the forest where those impossible colors danced between the trees. My feet would carry me to the threshold before my mind could stop them, and I would stand there, hand on the doorknob, listening to the invitation humming in my bones. I don't remember opening the door. But I must have, because there are mornings I wake with pine needles in my hair, with dirt between my toes, with the taste of night air still fresh in my lungs. The bed is always perfectly made around me, the sheets pulled tight as if I'd never left at all. The curtain waves goodbye each time. A single deliberate flutter as I cross the threshold, as if it knows where I'm going even when I don't. And when I return, whenever I return, it welcomes me back with that same purposeful dance, lifting and falling in patterns that feel like words I should remember but can't quite recall. The morning air was crisp again. The fragrance of damp earth rising as mist clung to the edges of the forest. I watched from my kitchen window as the rocking chair moved in its eternal rhythm, 7 rocks forward, 7 back, keeping time with the humming that had become as natural as my heartbeat. The curtain fluttered gently in the breeze, stirring as if in conversation with the world outside. And somewhere behind the trees, the lights were waiting for nightfall.